try that again. Chuchwinuk, good morning, everybody. We are going to reconvene for our final day, or day 3 of the 15th Annual General Meeting for the BC Assembly of First Nations. I'm just going to check in a couple of things with you at this time. We do, as we had indicated, we had done our best to shorten today down to get everything in before lunch. As we know, so many of you have a ways to travel to get back to your home fires. And with your permission, I'm seeking the will of the Assembly to see if we can move all of our outstanding resolutions. So we have 1 on-time resolution and 4 late resolutions that have come forward. They were handed out in a package to you yesterday. If you did not receive that package, they will have some copies for you at registration. But I'm asking for the will of the Assembly to move those resolutions forward to just before the health break that's scheduled for 10:45. So I'm just looking for some. Is there anyone that disagrees with that idea? How about that? Seeing no opposition to that, I'll just say we're going to move our resolutions to rather having. Again, I encourage you, there is plenty of excellent coffee over there, juice if you need it, more breakfast items too, but we will do that. So just before the 10:45 break, we're just going to move all of the resolutions to that time. So it is my pleasure to call upon one of our wonderful hosts in the community that we find ourselves in, Musqueam, and to call upon Larry Grant to start us off in a good way. So please help me in welcoming him to the podium.
Good morning, everyone. How are you? Wanana ait tina shkwalawan konsi hui namet tina whale he looks all diwias tinsa. Aichkash siem kos the huimatal amastal tina whale. Itiatam kos amastal to ka imuk the still settling. Itiatam kos amastal with the secret imuk to the talmo. It's a thumb cause amastal to slagum imuk the maap. It's a thumb cause amastal I see much following cause the capes for eat and a whale inanimate the muk them all cause that's a wee tilts. Heitska. Just want to say thank you and welcome. Collect consi te tala to swallow for inamet. To whale, for to dot as we not must be masked hammock to no whale nonamit to mux them because that's a wee till high tap gasam nashaya. Just want to say thank you and welcome to all of you here on behalf of the Hunt Communum speaking Musqueam people. And I raise my hands in welcome as our ancestor, our Dabiak, our great grandparent Kayapalano had done when he greeted the first visitors to arrive here. So I want to say thank you for all of you for being here, doing the work that you do for all of us so that we can create a better partnership with Canada and the province. And when you're going home, take good care of yourself. Safe travels this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for that very generous greeting and welcome to your territory. And we raise our hands to the entire community for being so welcoming to us. At this time, we're going to go straight into the first panel, which is emergency management. We'll call forward to this table on my right, Regional Chief Terry Teegee, also Chief Rick McLean, Chief Larry Nuksky, as well as Catherine Lappe, to please come join me here at the front. So thank you so much. We'll go to microphone number 3 to Regional Chief.
Masai, Madam Chair, Deneza, Tsekuza, Skaiza, Chiefs, Hereditary Chiefs, delegates, guests. First of all, I just want to acknowledge the territory of the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, and thank them for allowing us on their territory, and also to thank Elder Larry Grant for the prayer and the welcoming. So this panel, I just want to keep it on a very high level, and it's great to see some of the chiefs here to talk about their experiences in terms of the emergency management of the unprecedented wildfires we've seen this year. Once again, second year in a row. The worst year we've seen in terms of area burned was this past year. Exceeded the amount of areas that were burned in 2017. Much of the lands that were burned this year in the wildfires were dead mountain pine beetle wood that was out there in terms of for many years that were sitting out there, and that was well over 50%. And as I said earlier, in the last couple of days, majority of those that were evacuated were First Nations and were First Nations communities. And we've seen very similar experiences for the First Nations communities. Some wanted to stay and protect their territories and their communities and their homes, very similar to the Tsilhqot'in, who wanted to stay in 2017 to protect their lands and to protect their properties, because as Chief Joe Alphonse stated in 2017, that you know, if the fires took those homes, it's going to take 30 years to replace them. So I think you know, back in 2017 and 2018, I think those experiences really need to be put forward to the two levels of government, and also to our First Nations peoples, to have a plan and be prepared in terms of emergency management. It's much more than wildfires. We've seen landslides over the last few years. The changing climate has really put us in very disastrous you know, mode in terms of what's occurring in and around our communities. There's also the last few days we've seen off the shores of Vancouver Island the seismic activity, so there's certainly another management issue in terms of another emergency management issue that we need to heed and also be prepared for. So this past year as well, with Grand Chief Edward John, we did meet with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and also Premier Horgan, and we brought forward the proposal for the $200 million for much of the First Nations communities in British Columbia to access the more resources in terms of being prepared for emergency management for our communities. So we brought that forward, and it continues to be a standing ask to the two levels of government. We certainly know that we've been in another area we've been under-resourced on. And just to the communities that I visited in the Burns Lake area, Burns Lake Band, the communities, Chief Dan George is here, that became an emergency management center, as long as the many chiefs out in Burns Lake area, Chislata, Nitaipan, Skintai, and their leadership to take care of their people. To my right, visiting Notley, their emergency management in terms of their unit crew going out and fighting the fires along with Lil'wat Nation really uplifted many of the people out in Notley, and myself. It was really good to see, and we need to see more of that. And it's good to see that we're building capacity, but there needs to be more resources to have those unit crews developed by our communities. And to the emergencies that unprecedented, because I've never seen anything like that in Tahltan. Usually that's a very wet area that certainly, you know, you don't see those types of fires. And it happened this year in the Tahltan area. And the many structures that were burned down, the homes that were burned down, they're still out of home with the destruction of the home, not only the homes, but the smoke damage to many of the homes. So there are still many people out in Tahltan territory that aren't home yet. So we need to acknowledge that and hope that they get home soon, and hopefully it doesn't take 30 years that those homes get rebuilt. So I just want to hold my hands up to all those First Nations communities that really took it upon themselves to deal with this issue. And you know, it's as stated in the recent report by Chief Maureen Chapman and George Abbott, that it's a new normal in terms of wildfires. So moving ahead, I just don't want to take up too much time, but at a very high level, we're still pushing the two levels of government to access more resources for our communities to be well prepared in the future. Now is the time to do forestry management from now until the coming spring to deal with the fuel loads in and around your communities and your homes. With climate change, we're seeing wildfire seasons extend into March, when usually the start of the wildfire season happens at the beginning of April to the end of October. And with climate change, it's very unpredictable. So thank you, and I hold my hands up to all those First Nations communities that took it upon themselves to deal with this issue. And also our prayers and our thoughts to all those communities and those our membership that were adversely affected by these fires. So thank you, Masai, and I pass it on to my colleague, Chief Larry Newski.
Good morning. Hello. Good morning. My name is Larry Newski, and I'm the elected chief for Notley-Witten. I would like to thank the Musqueam people for allowing us to do our business and report to you the disaster that we suffered this summer. Notley-Witten is a small community just south of, or northwest of Prince George. This is our mountain. Some of our band members put a sign up there that sort of represents the Hollywood sign. So it's nice to see. It's becoming a pretty big landmark. Notley traditional land comprises of whoever put this PowerPoint together didn't do a very good job. This is Ormond Lake. Just to give you an idea of what the burn looks like, this is one of the area that was burnt. And at this area, in this area, we have a cultural center, a healing center that services the entire province of BC. We have many clients come into Ormond Lake Cultural Camp for drug and alcohol treatment. In the Notley territory, there's 87 lakes, 37 creeks, and of various sizes. Notley comprises of 7 small reserves that is about 97. The whole land mass is fairly small for the reserve lands as compared to the area of our traditional lands, which is about 500,000 hectares. Wildlife 2018 response phase, our experience. Shovel Lake wildfire complex burnt an estimated 93,000 hectares of forest lands, which significantly affected the health of our citizens, our local economy, and the spiritual and cultural sites of Notlawit and First Nations. In addition, the anguish, the stress of being evacuated outside their homes and a great part of our traditional territory, including very important spiritual sites and cultural buildings. And the physical and emotional health of our citizens been negatively impacted to levels yet unknown to us. Our local economies, primarily based on our traditional practice such as fishing, hunting, medicines, and food gathering, were decimated. This is Notlawit traditional territory. The blue represents the area of our territory. The red, the top left is a Shovel Lake fire, which burnt an estimated, like I said, 93,000 hectares. And the lower is the Island Lake fire, which burnt an estimated 22,000 hectares. Shovel Lake fire reported about July 29th, 2018, BC Wildfire Northwest Fire Center responded to the fire, which has been deemed as human-caused. And yet you look at the latest reports, it suggests that the fire is still under investigation. We know who started this fire. It was logging contractors, non-native logging contractors. So we need to ensure that we get to the bottom of this and have the report reflect how the fire has actually started. In Notlawit Council declared a local state of emergency on August 13th, 2018, and guided by version 3 of the Notlawit Emergency Plan, activated the Notlawit Emergency Operations Center, which was mandated to protect lives and property and work in collaboration with the federal, provincial, and non-governmental agency. Those federal and provincial representatives that should have been helping us were essentially absent. In our appreciation dinner for the firefighters that helped fight the fire, on one of our walls we had pictures of all the firefighters and the volunteers that came from many parts of BC. And the other wall of our hall had no pictures. And that picture those pictures should have represented both the federal and provincial government, but there was none. We were left alone. We had nobody to rely on except ourselves. And I'm pretty damn proud to say that we did an excellent job in terms of protecting our community. This is the Shovel Lake fire timeline. We'll provide you with a copy of all the slides, so you can look at the timelines and the progression of the fire and the size of the fire as it got larger over a period of 30 days. Our recovery phase, that's another area that we're going to be having issues with, especially when it comes to reimbursement for the funding that we have expended. It's going to take at least a year or two to recover from or get those reimbursements if we ever get them at all. There is a lack of provincial and federal input in terms of the recovery phase. There needs to be, both levels of government need to step up. I have a few recommendations, and basically the recommendation comes from the 2017 Chilcotin study that was done by Chief Maureen Chapman and Minister Abbott. There's 108 recommendations that were made, and very few were fulfilled or actioned. The one recommendation I would suggest is to provide an adequate level of funding for BC First Nations to respond to any emergency impact. Those funds should be in our administration office, and we'll use it as necessary. Clearly identify emergency resources provided to the BC First Nations, including contingency funds provided by BC and Canada for emergency response and recovery. And finally, implement the 108 recommendation from the Chapman-Abbott study. I would lastly say thank you to Terry Chigi for visiting our community during the fire season. And Ed John, really appreciate it. And these two individuals, when they visited our community, really uplifted our people, especially those people that were out on the line firefighting. Really helped It appears that as if the provincial and federal governments have not learned much from after the 2017 wildfire season, in spite of comprehensive report produced by Chief Maureen Chapman and Minister Abbott last, recommending far-reaching changes to emergency management services in our province. Emergency management in our province has worsened. First Nations community are not merely subjects to the devastation caused by wildfire and other natural disaster. We are active participants and most directly affected by those events. Our collective experience in managing our land and natural resources have served us well for millennia. It's time for the provincial and federal government departments to include our experience and recommendation not as an afterthought, but as a foundation to respond to emergency situation across our province. I'd like to thank you again for allowing me to give you this presentation.
Good morning, everybody. Chief Rick McLean, Taltan Band. Pleased to be here in Musqueam territory and able to share our experience with you here today. We had a fire and lightning strike caused fire in the Northwest Fire Zone. I think on the 1st of August we had 450 lightning strikes in that district, which sparked several fires. One which was about 6 kilometers west of our community by a lake called Alkali Lake. So it's not the Alkali Lake that's in the Chilcotin, but we have our own Alkali Lake up north, and it burnt very hot. Our dry index in the area has been the driest it's ever been. It was drier than the dry index that was in the Merritt fire. So for being that far northwest, it's unprecedented for it to be that dry. And it was very quickly deemed out of control at a very few hectares because it was just raging so hard. The small unit crew that was there was unable to go and fight it, and we had to get in the bucket ships and the air tankers as soon as possible, but being that far north, everything takes time to get there. My community wanted to run up there with the bucket brigade and fight it, but unfortunately, without the proper tools and training and the way it was burning, it was we were risking serious loss of human life if we went and did that. We did get heavy machinery on the fire as soon as possible, and it was equipment and air battle. That was a losing battle for us. It breached every fire break we put in. It burned faster and hotter in the deciduous areas that they told us that it was going to slow down and stop in. It was a real dragon that came through our territory. It burnt not around our community, not by our community, it burnt through our community. I just learned that we lost 21 homes and a bunch of other structures, outbuildings, sheds, shops in our community. The minister, Jane Philpott, came up and she told us that it's the largest wildfire damage and loss in the community in Canadian history. We learned a lot of lessons. In fact, Chief Alphonse told us in 2017, clean up your communities. In fact, in 2017, we have a large green belt down through the middle of our community, and we were watching what was going on TV that day, and me and my band manager said we better start cleaning up. And we took 48 truckloads out of our community in 2017. And if we didn't do that, that green belt would have burnt this year, and we would have had probably total loss. So, thanks, Joe. Having said that, the message is clean up your communities, get rid of that debris, create your fire guards. I know our plans and direction from the province when we look at First Nations emergency funding and preparedness, there's a bureaucracy there that we need to overcome and make it easier to apply and get funding to do those type of projects in the community. Because you got to have a community plan, you got to have an emergency plan, you got to have all kinds of plans in place to qualify for funding. I think we need to loosen up those strings a little bit and just put that type of funding right into your dollars that come from the feds, because it needs to be done every year. Our underfunded fire departments are ill-equipped and really inadequate for us. And I know many of you sitting around this table understand exactly what I'm saying when you get $10,000 to run your volunteer fire department for a year. You know, we spend about $7,000 of that 10 to keep our fire truck up to snuff. And by the time you get a fire chief, there's no money for training, there's no money for equipment, there's no money for stuff like that. So we need to have a serious look at how we prepare our fire departments and how we, what we train for. It needs to be definitely resourced with this new norm of dry and risk of wildfire. I think every community who lives in the woods, in the forests, in the remote areas, not only needs to be trained for structural protection, but they need to be trained for wildfire. We need to add the S100 courses to your fire departments. We need to add the equipment needed to fight the fires. We need the pumps. We need the piss cans. We need the structural protection sprinklers that we waited several days for, and if we had them earlier, we would have probably saved a lot more on our property loss. So these are the type of things that our communities need to prepare for, train for. and there's no reason why we shouldn't have our own unit crews able to be fully trained and take things on and work hand in hand with wildfire when these things come close to your community. It's a lot of work. I know our members need to step up as well and really put in the time and effort to become trained in your volunteer fire departments. I think we need to rely on each other and help each other's communities prepare for this. And it was a realization for us to understand that there's another fire season coming just around the corner. We have other reserves in other communities that we have to get ready for next year. So a lot of work needs to be done this winter to look at getting the funding they need to go and clean up and put those fire breaks in and get the structural protection, sprinklers, stuff on hand so that when it does happen, you're ready. Prepare, 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 and I can't say that enough. We were lucky, just a week before the fire started, we went through our emergency plan with our management. So reviewing those plans pre-fire season, pre-Fichette, because it's not only fires, but there's flooding and other disasters that happen. So I would highly suggest that your band managers and your management, your health staff, review those plans on a regular basis, just so that you know what to do when it happens, how to set up your office, your EOCs, how do you get your evacuation, how do we keep track of people. We lost 21 homes, but we never lost one individual. And that's, to me, it was the most important thing. We had a wall of fire 200 feet high come to our community. There was no way we were going to put that out with shovels and picks. But our equipment and our guys, like the night of the 5th when we did the full evacuation about 11:30, the cats were putting a guard around top of the community, and that wall of fire came so fast they had to jump off their machines and run down over the hill. So while we were in the emergency stage and evacuated, and we're still evacuated, we had to get into the response phase and set up the EOC, and I was fortunate enough to have a very good team, and we were well into response while we were still in emergency, while the fire was still in the community. Our sister communities, Adis and Iskut, really stepped up and helped us with our evacuees. We have people spread from Whitehorse to Terrace to Prince George still. The full focus of our EOC and our team has been to get people back home as soon as possible. But you learn about a lot of things in a fire and recovery and response when you learn about hazardous material that's been put in our ancient homes, asbestos, lead, all these type of things that you have to test for before you can put people back in and do the recovery work. Cleaning up the danger trees, the slope stabilities. Our water system got contaminated because the power to our pump house went down and the power lines burnt. We had to pump right out of the creek into the water tower, so it contaminated our system. So all of these things that you have to do to make your community livable and safe again need to be corrected once you go through this. We learned a lot about engineer work that needs to be done, the assessments, all the smoke the toxic smoke that infiltrated our community caused us to have to do a full insurance claim on the smoke damage. So every home that wasn't burnt is now have to be cleaned, and the work that needs to be done there is a monumental task. Just the cleaning phase, our insurance claim is upwards to $14 million worth of work that has to be done yet. we got to put in a 100-man camp, and those guys are going to come in and start cleaning the homes. The insulation of the attics got to come out. They all got to be washed, painted. All the stofas, everything that's been smoke damaged needs to be replaced. Huge costs that you have to recover through, be it insurance, be it the province, be it the feds, learning the EMBC application process, how you apply for your emergency management funding I think we've got to do some workshops on that over the winter. But I would like to say that the federal government was there with us and offering their support right off the bat. And once we established our EOC with our team, we took the lead in our response and our recovery. That recovery piece, thank you. We're still in recovery. Like I said, our community is still displaced, and we're hoping to have our first homes cleaned and people back in them by November 15th and fully back in by December 15th. It's a tough timeline when we have close to 300 people displaced, but we've got to keep pushing those boundaries, pushing those timelines. And when somebody says you can't, you push back and say you can, and we will. But getting back into the community is one thing. We're very worried about the long winter that we have with a community that's been fully burnt in and around there, unable to get out and go snowmobiling and stuff just because the forest is a very dangerous place. The trees are falling all over the place, so it's very dangerous. So we're really worried about the mental health of our citizens once we do get back. We're looking at a 2-year plan to offer those supports. We're going to get down to about 6 hours of daylight here very shortly up north, and it's those times, those winter months that are our concern. And although we haven't lost anybody yet, we have a long ways to go and a lot of work to do with our health team and mental health of our citizens to ensure that we keep our people safe and help them prepare. We will go into a rebuilding plan and phase, doing our community plan over the winter, and we will start to rebuild by next spring. And we have a lot of work to do to get there, but with the partnerships from the province and the feds and all the neighboring communities, the fundraising, the benefits that have been put on for our community has been very touching and heartwarming, and I thank every organization and everybody who has contributed to our disaster. And we're hoping to have a large celebration next summer to thank everybody properly, because we're not out of it yet, and we have a lot of work to do. So just to recap, clean up your communities, get those plans done. Even without them, it doesn't stop you from getting the crews out there, picking up the debris and cleaning up, and ensure, and let's work together to make sure that we properly fund our fire departments for wildfire as well as structural fire. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back here in Musqueam territory, and thanks to Elder Larry Grant for opening us up this morning. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. And it's a pleasure to be with all of you here on Musqueam territory again to talk about emergency management, which is obviously a difficult thing for us to keep having to do season after season, hearing about the tremendous impacts on so many communities. In fact, over the last 2 years, it's been fully 1/3 of communities in BC that have been affected by floods and fires. So when Chief McLean talks about prepare, 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 there's a good track record for why that is so essential. I really want to acknowledge all the First Nations that have been going through these various emergency events, and thank both Chief McLean and Chief Newski for taking the time to share their experiences while they're still in the midst of their own recoveries. I also want to thank and acknowledge the many communities that stepped up and supported evacuees in very difficult times, whether it's Kitsim-Kalem, who hosted many evacuees in Terrace and had various support services for them, or Burns Lake area, as Regional Chief mentioned, or Dease and Iskut, who continue to host many evacuees. Again, it was neighbors stepping up to help neighbors that really made probably the worst time in people's lives manageable, as they were supported by such welcoming hosts. As we recognize, no two emergencies are the same, and each community has to deal with their own specific circumstances with the assets that they have available at the time. Reflecting on the last 2 years, both 2017 and 2018 exceeded the worst of previous seasons, and we have learned a lot, but as Chief Newski points out, we have much work ahead of us to ensure that First Nations are full partners with emergency management, and that they have the supports necessary to prepare for and respond to emergency events. And it is critically important that we get this right. As the Regional Chief mentioned, with global warming and climate change, emergency events are happening with greater frequency and greater severity. So we have less and less time between various seasons to prepare and ensure that things are moving forward. We also have seen events like those in Clay-Clay-Tenay with the natural gas explosion, the tsunami alerts, the earthquakes off the coast of Port Hardy just recently. All of these, even if they do not necessarily damage communities, have a lasting impact emotionally, and reminding us of the essential need to prepare ourselves, because BC is in fact a very hazard-rich province and has more than its share of events year over year. Indigenous Services Canada is continuously seeking opportunities to better support First Nations and our emergency management partners, and we welcome the feedback from communities that have gone through events and are trying to respond to each and every recommendation and request for assistance as we address the issues. One example of a new development is that we have a Building Back Better strategy guide, which was released in August. This policy has provided us with a number of new tools, such as the ability to support mitigative enhancements during the recovery process, so that we can do more than just replace what was there, but we can replace it in a better way to mitigate future damages. It also gives us the ability to provide funding for social and cultural supports during times of evacuation and displacement in order to mitigate psychosocial impacts. We have worked closely with partners such as the NBC and the First Nations Health Authority, and in the case of Tahltan, the Stikine Holistic Working Group, to ensure that these psychosocial supports are done in a coordinated manner. As many of you will be aware, the Government of Canada has just recently responded to the Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs report that was entitled From the Ashes. In fact, many of you around the table here testified in 2017 to the Standing Committee. And in the government's response, we do accept all of the recommendations, and you will see and hear your voices in those recommendations and the government's commitment to respond and keep improving things as we go forward. We are also working with the province to try to respond to the Abbott-Chapman report and ensure further enhancements to our policy authorities in order to better support First Nations before, during, and after emergencies. And it's unfortunate that Madeleine Maley, who was previously at BC Wildfires but now is the ADM at Emergency Management BC, was unable to join us today to talk about some of the efforts underway at local, regional, and provincial levels to ensure a better coordinated and supportive system. That said, as you know, Indigenous Services Canada is only one agency among many of those that have a role in emergency management. And for this reason, we need to ensure better coordination with these provincial agencies and support innovation at both the community and nation level with respect to disaster risk reduction and emergency management. I have to say Chief McLean has been extremely modest about the incredible work of the Tahltan Emergency Operations Center. As soon as they opened their doors, the EOC staff and their leadership began planning for recovery. They had the regional district and the province embedded in their Emergency Operations Center to ensure coordination of response activities. And from the beginning, we at ISC, at Indigenous Services Canada, realized that our challenge was to have to keep up with the pace of Tahltan, to ensure that we could provide them with the technical expertise, quick approvals for approaches that they were developing for things like a workforce camp, and that they had the assurance that they would have the resources continue to flow to them so that we would not be holding them back. And I hope that we've done a fairly good job in doing so. They are, as the Chief has indicated, on an ambitious timeline to have community members home, and there's much we can learn from the incredible approach that they've done to getting workers and the work done in such quick order. I had the opportunity last week to accompany the Minister and Grand Chief Ed John to Telegraph Creek, as well as to the Tahltan EOC. And I can say that Minister Philpott was moved by the contrast between the beauty of the Tahltan territories and the severity of the wildfire impacts. Her photos, she took hundreds of photos, and they've even been picked up by Yukon CBC. But more importantly, like any of us who go to see Tahltan in action, we are profoundly impacted by your resilience, your determination, and positive attitude to just get things done for your people. I also want to mention that in the past year, we've been working with the Silkatine National Government and have a new collaborative emergency management agreement that is, again, the first of its kind in the country, where we have a tripartite emergency management agreement with the nation, and it is breaking new ground with respect to cultivating nation-based emergency management approaches, and I'm hoping that we'll have many success stories in the coming months as we move forward on that agreement. Reflecting on the differences between 2017 and 18, I can say with confidence that officials in both federal and provincial systems are starting to understand better the practice of emergency management, that the practice of emergency management will ultimately fail if it does not fully recognize the authority, capabilities, and knowledge of First Nations. In many communities, the coordination and the communications were much better, but we recognize that we need to ensure that First Nations are brought in not just to hear what's happening and how the response is occurring, but really to be brought in on decision-making and preparedness before events hit their communities. We are getting close to concluding a tripartite emergency management agreement, which is one of the recommendations coming out of the Standing Committee report. Such an instrument will provide mechanisms for oversight to advance emergency management on reserve, and if I may be so bold to say, it could hold federal and provincial agencies accountable for their responsibilities to First Nations. So it's not there to replace all the work that you're doing on the ground, but to make sure that we're in fact affecting systemic change, so that each community doesn't have to hoe the road themselves, but that there are systemic changes that will ensure for better training, better procurement, better hiring of First Nations firefighters, enhancing the capabilities on the front lines, and truly changing things for the better. We have been visiting communities since the floods and fires began, and assisting with the reimbursements, the troubleshooting, and making connections. In fact, Chief Niski, I believe that there's a number of our folks coming out to your community next week, and we'll continue to be there with you over the long haul, and appreciate your attention today and all of your efforts throughout the years. So thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you to all of our members of the panel. We are going to open the floor for some questions at this time. So 13 and 15, so go to microphone number 13, please.
High School, Madam Chair. Toby Joseph, proxy for Stay Out First Nation. I've been asked, are First Nations part of the discussions when ISC meets with EMBC regarding planning or allocating resources, and if not, why?
Do you want me to?
Sure, yeah.
Wasn't sure how you wanted to proceed. So the structure that we have right now is that we have two bilateral agreements, one with Emergency Management BC and one with BC Wildfires. They basically codified, which has been the practice for the last 30 years, to ensure that equipment, resources are offered to First Nations on the same basis as any other community. So we pay the province for those services because we don't have those kind of capabilities on the ground. When those bilateral agreements were signed a couple of years ago, the First Nations Leadership Council asked that they be made tripartite, and so that's what we're trying to do over the course of the 2 years. We're actually trying to combine them into one agreement and recognizing that it's not just about the service agreements, but how the whole provincial system supports First Nations, and so we are trying to make the systemic changes. It's basically a fee-for-service arrangement we have with the province to do that. On the other hand, we have resources for emergency planning that are often, Fire Smart programs and other emergency planning that we work with the First Nations Emergency Services Society on call for proposals. But I hear, and I've heard over the last year, the concern that they aren't ongoing resources and they aren't allocated directly to communities, but they are on an application basis. That is one of the challenges, quite frankly, that we have, as well as for volunteer fire departments. So it's one of those pieces that we still need to continue to be active in trying to ensure that there are more stable and ongoing fundings to communities. But to be honest, we're not at that point yet.
Number 3, please.
I think one of the structures that we're trying to conclude is the MOU between the province and the feds, between the First Nations Leadership Council. And just to Catherine's point, I think it needs to be better understood in terms of how to access some of those services, because certainly I know firsthand some of the chief's experiences in terms of access and resources for emergency management. And I think, when we're talking about emergency management, even though we're here for wildfires, we're also here to hear the other experiences of many First Nations. And I know on the coast, when I went to the Nuchalnath, it's how the communities are prepared to go search for those that are lost at sea, and figuring out how best that can happen for them. And I heard it firsthand from Chief Greg Louie and President Jude Sayers about the experience there of the many that are missing, that they continue to search for. And also, too, my board member here, Chief Marilyn Slett, and the lack of response of when the Nathan E. Stewart occurred. And that was really one of the points of their court case that they filed just a few short weeks ago. So it's those issues as well that I think we should take acknowledge, and also the experiences of this panel. So thank you.
Thank you. Just going to ask for your cooperation for just a brief minute before I go to the next question. Why, and pardon me for ushering you up, but it was just because I was trying to see the numbers. When you sat down, you may or may not have moved the numbers to your microphones. They're essential for me keeping track of speakers list. So you can just make sure your number is facing me and close to your microphone. That's really helpful. Thank you so very much. We're going to go over to microphone number 15, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for the presentations on what has become an extremely important issue in all of our First Nations community. I'm Judith Sayers. I'm the president of the Nuchalnath Tribal Council. This summer was, a wake-up call, another wake-up call on how we're not really prepared for forest fires. And in the Nuchalnath territory, in particular in the Hadasat territory, there was a huge fire burning right behind Zabalas. And Zabalas, of course, is a town, and the mountain is very steep behind it. There's a lot of Hadasat members living in that town who at the present time are still out of their homes. And the reason is the mountain behind them has been ruled unstable. And at any time that hillside could come down on all their homes. And, throughout this process, I was being updated by those people who felt they had been abandoned, I guess like many other First Nations, because there was no services, and they had all the people they could out on the lines fighting it. So, the questions that I still haven't got answers for is, what is the priority in fighting forest fires in British Columbia? Is it dependent on how big the city is, or how valuable the resources are in the area? Like, I don't understand. Like, for days they wouldn't have any helicopters or any other infrastructure to fight that fire, and the fire would get bigger. And then they'd send in a helicopter for a day and it'd be gone. And then the fire would roar up again. And then they have to send in the huge super crane or whatever they call that. And I watched the same thing from my territory, the Hoopachusett territory. There was a fire on the Beauforts, and that one seemed to be easily put out. The fire on the Arbutus Summit across the canal was something I could watch in my back patio all the time. They had one helicopter going all the time, one. And it took them days to put out the fire. You know, and if there was enough equipment out there, those fires could be put out very easily without destroying all of those resources. And I understand that there was a great need around there, but I don't know what sort of planning is going on to ensure that British Columbia has enough equipment to deal with those kinds of fires. And it's, you know, it's a subject I'm going to bring up with the directors of the NTC so we can try and start, you know, working on these kinds of issues, because, you know, there's just so much areas, and I heard this last year too, is that when the forest burns up, where do people go hunting? Where do people gather their medicines and all of the things they need for their cultural needs? And that's not what we want to see. We don't want to be doing that recovery. So I'm interested in the recovery plan that you talked about. What's that? I can do that. And then, you know, Regional Chief Terry did mention that we had issues in Newfoundland Territory this year where we lost 5 to 6 people to the ocean. And it's great, the police might be there for a day or two, or Coast Guard, but then they figure out that, you know, we just don't think that we're going to recuperate these people. And, you know, where our Newfoundland communities don't give up. We keep going out over and over again, not giving up on the lives of our members, and that costs a lot of money. And there's no funds that are available. And how do we deal with those kind of emergencies? Because to us, they are emergencies. They're dealing with the lives of our people. And there's a hole. You go to ISK and they say, oh, sorry, we don't deal with that. Or, you know, so where do we go for funding to help us to continue to do those kinds of searches? I hear the report that was done by Chief Moraine and George Abbott, and they call it the new normal. And then the Premier of the province talks about, well, this is the new normal. I don't agree. I always say, excuse me, this is the new normal? What happened to trying to stop and prevent forest fires? Why aren't we taking every one of those recommendations in that report and more and fixing the situation so we're not dealing with a new normal, that we're staying where we should be in protecting our resources, our trees, everything that's important to us right there. So I think there is an awful lot of work to be done, and it's good to hear that this MOU is being put in place, but is it going to be enough on the ground in our communities? Because it's always the First Nations communities that are being affected by these fires. And what can we do to be better prepared when we don't have the money to do those preparations? We don't have the equipment that we need, and yet people stay when they're told to leave so they can defend their homes. So to me, there are some really critical questions that I think we need answers, and you know, we'll continue to work on this through the winter so we can be better prepared for next year. But there are still a lot of unanswered questions, and especially the one in trying to find some of our lost members that are out at sea that we haven't been able to find, and we could really use some financial support in that regard. Thank you.
Microphone number 3, please.
Thank you. Very great questions, and some of those questions that we need to hear at this table in terms of what is priority. Is it the $1 million homes versus our communities? We've seen that time and time again, and this past year it's no different. And that was a question that came to me during this fire season in August. Certainly, I will bring that question to emergency management once again about priority. And the other, speaking of priority, is the questions that came up about our unit crews and the utilization of out-of-country firefighting, you know, resources from Mexico or elsewhere, where our people, and then we have unit crews that can be better utilized. Where's the priority there? There's definitely some issues with the Ministry of Forests and how they utilize the resources, whether they know about those unit crews being in existence or not, or what's a priority there. There's another priority question. And when the unit crew that came from Lillooet to Notley, we heard about it, and then they were coming up. That was a really good signal, and it was really uplifting to see the Notley and Lillooet crew working together. That uplifted everybody, and I think that's something that we need to consider. And like these chiefs in the many communities that took it upon themselves to just do it, I think some of these things we just have to do it ourselves. Create our unit crews, make sure they get out there and assist one another. And the issue on the coast about the missing people, I really believe that there needs to be allocation of resources in terms of how to better resource those emergencies such as those for the Nutulnit and the many communities along the coast. Not only for missing people, but also for many of the ships, the tugboats. They're still out there. They're still in existence, and you know that's one of the arguments in regards to the Trans Mountain pipeline is the more traffic that's going to be coming and in existence already. So that's another preparation we need to really consider and be better resourced. Thank you.
So maybe, oops, sorry. I keep trying to reach the microphone and I'm moving the table. So thank you for the questions. I mean, there's a lot there to unpack. And I guess I don't want to speak for the province, but you know, in terms of the allocation of resources, public safety is the #1 piece that they look at, and so that's why you'll see allocation to cities in many cases is that they are trying to ensure the protection of life, and we've had 2 incredibly difficult fire seasons and have luckily not lost anyone. And when you compare it to jurisdictions like California, where there is a different approach in terms of a lot of people staying and fighting themselves as individuals, you see tremendous loss of life in Greece this past summer and various other pieces. So public safety is always their #1 concern. The secondary piece they then look at is things like critical infrastructure. And then there are a number of other considerations. But I think it is a conversation that's worth having with the NBC and BC wildfires in greater detail. And that's why I really think it's important that we get a tripartite MOU and we really have those deep conversations. The Leadership Council, individual communities, myself and others, we've been having many conversations with the NBC and wildfires, but they're these one-offs. And we're not structured yet where we're setting up an action plan and holding ourselves accountable to making difference on specific timelines and finding resources from different areas. You know, a lot of the mitigation that communities want to do requires cooperation off reserve. It's not just in your communities where you can clean up. You're at risk from what's happening on Crown land, on private land, and various other places. So we need to find a way of really establishing an action plan and leveraging all the resources in place. And as the regional chief was saying, ensuring that your firefighters and people that want a career in it are being provided opportunity to get trained, to be there to protect their communities, but also to be available where emergencies occur. On the issue of coastal search and rescue, as you say, you know, Indigenous Services Canada is limited on reserve on land, but I had a conversation with Chief Louis last week, and we will try and see what we can do to convene some of those partners and think about how we can give consideration as well to that these individual search and rescues are really opportunities of supporting the capabilities and the capacity there in the event of larger emergencies. And so we'll work with you to try and see if we can convene some of those partners and break some new ground or some off the ground in the oceans to try and address some of these issues, because we certainly appreciate how challenging they are for you on the coast.
Thank you. I'm just going to if you're wondering where you are in the order of speakers, I'm just going to say it in order of numbers. So we're going to microphone 21 next, then 19, 17, 18, and then back to 21. So we're going to go to microphone 21, please. 21. Yep.
Good morning. Chief Judy Wilson, Naskana, the Secwepemc Nation, Secwepemc part of the Union, BC Indian Chiefs, executive member. I'd like to thank the elder for the prayer this morning and being on Musqueam to do our work today, especially talking about the wildfires and emergency management. I'd like to thank Chief Larry and Chief Rick for sharing their experiences, and also that there's many nations, like our community in 2003, half our community was burnt up, and our members also elected to stay behind to save the houses and things like that. But I'd say we're still recovering from that. A lot of our plants and animals, and I would even say the water were affected from that fire. And there's other communities, the Elephant Hill fire. I was texting with Chief Ryan Day. His community is still fighting to have $200,000 reimbursed to their community. It's from the firefighters that they had paid to go out and save their homes and save their community. The firefighters are not being recognized because they're not certified, so that's an issue. But I'd like to back up a little bit because we're talking about the aftermath or the after effect, and learning from Chief Larry's experience that it was actually the forestry company that started the fire. You got to think about all the resources that are removed from our territorial lands, millions and trillions of dollars that come off our lands, and nothing is put back. $30 million from the feds to the province, and I just heard Catherine say, well, a lot of that goes for public safety or safety, which means the main towns and cities and villages and stuff like that. And we're on the outer skirts of the adjacent communities, so we get very little left over for any of those resources. I know because in our community that happened in 2003, and we had very little resources actually come to our community for that fire. So the math doesn't add up, and if you do that with all the resources that are removed from our land, it should be at that point something is given directly to our communities, because we're the ones being put at risk, and those are our trees. We own those trees, and those are the land, the title to the land, and it's a reverse effect. It's like waiting for something to happen, and we have to be more proactive than that in turning around how the existing, I guess the existing arrangements are between the feds and the province, because and I think that's why it's important with that resolution to turn that around. What Judith was saying is really important. I think we should be adding in the resolution about the acknowledgement, recognition, and implementation of the Chapman-Abbott, the new normal report and recommendations. So we did have some wording to add as item number 5 when we get to the resolution. But I think it would be important to have those recommendations implemented as well and stand them up, because I think they did a good job of visiting all of our communities in regarding to the effects of the emergencies. So the whole structure is operating in governance, and we have to change that around, and that the resolution's a start, but we really have to take into account how the money is taken off our territorial lands and very little is put back into us. And I'd venture to say if out of that 30 million targeted for emergency, if you assess to each community how much you actually really received, which the purpose of the dollars are supposed to be for First Nations, it went to other places other than your community or nation. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to clarify, the resolution that I believe Cookby Judy's referring to is a late resolution that was previously presented at UBCIC and First Nations Summit. It's the last resolution in the package of 4, the support and principle for tripartite MOU between the First Nations Leadership Council, Indigenous Services Canada, and Emergency Management BC and BC Wildfire Services. Is that correct? Yes, just wanted to make sure that everybody knew what you were talking about at that time. We'll get to that resolution once we've wrapped up with this speakers list, and I am going to cut it off at the last person who raised their hand, because we do have a full morning to get through, and you also have planes, trains, and automobiles that will not wait, unfortunately. Go to microphone number 19, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kisukyukyet kapiniskit hu sukil kukni Nelson Mayitki hu sukil kukni guam maskoyam makis. Good morning, Cheryl Casmer with First Nations Summit and Leadership Council. I'd like to thank the panel for the presentation and to the chiefs for sharing their experiences and recognizing that there are a number of other communities and leadership who are experiencing the same difficulties and atrocities that have taken place over the summer, not just this year, but last year as well. And I know that the presentation focused on wildfires in particular, and we all know that once the ground stability has been damaged, as it has been with these fires, we'll now be having to deal with the issue of flooding come springtime. And I'm all too familiar with what happens in that situation. My home was one of the houses that flooded in my community a couple of years ago, and it's just a horrible feeling that you can't do nothing about that. There's nothing you can do when the water is rushing towards your house. So I would really like to see us in a situation where we are more in a proactive situation rather than being in a reactive situation as we have been over these last couple of summers. And we know that the situation is just going to become worse, but we need to do what's necessary to mitigate it and to do what we can to prepare. And I support the comments around the table about needing the resources necessary to do that work. And we need to have those resources in community now. Now is the time to start doing those burns, like during the fall-winter season, in order to make sure that the debris and all of that kind of stuff is dealt with so that we don't have risk in and around our homes. To date, as of last week, I should say, we heard on the news that there's still around 50 fires burning. 6 had started last week, and they believe that it was due to hunters being out in the woods and having fires. And still 11 of those fires are still designated as of note. So we're towards the middle end of October, and we still have that many fires going on in this province. And so the fire season is extending a lot longer than it used to. So we definitely do have a lot of work ahead of us. And I just wanted to make a couple of quick comments around the MOU that's been referenced, the one between Canada, British Columbia, and the Leadership Council. I just wanted to let the leadership know that we are trying to negotiate the best agreement, the best MOU that we can to ensure that there is consideration given to needing appropriate resourcing in your communities to do the work necessary that has been shared around the table. But I just want you to know that the latest draft that we had been working on has been provided back to us after review and edits by British Columbia in particular, and huge significant paragraphs were deleted from the MOU that we had included regarding the existence of our Indigenous inherent title and our continued existence as Indigenous peoples and the recognition of our jurisdiction and key language regarding the United Nations Declaration. And we know that those are important components that need to be a part of this MOU. If there's going to be true recognition of our ability to be recognized as governments, to be recognized to have the authority to make decisions about what happens in our communities and on our lands, we need this language in that MOU, and we are going to continue to push for that to happen. I think other things that we need to consider too is we talk about the millions of dollars needed to rebuild, and those are material and important material things. You need a home to feel safe, but at the same time I think we need to recognize that there needs to be supports available for communities and families to deal with trauma, because it is going to take a long time to be able to get through that whole process of healing and dealing with trauma from being removed from your home being destroyed, your community being destroyed. And so that's a significant component that needs to be considered as well. And I just want to continue to advocate for the First Nation Fund that has been discussed numerous occasions, needing something in here for First Nations, and we had talked about $2 million fund. So I think we need to continue to push that, 200 million. And the last point I want to make is in regards to the United Nations report that came out on climate change, about the life and death warning that came with it. And I think we need to have a conversation about that. And we need to, as Indigenous peoples, First Nations peoples, stewards of this land, we need to have a key role in determining what's going to happen in any kind of a climate change strategy or any kind of emergency management strategy, anything that's going to have an impact on our lands. So with that, I thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. I'm just going to turn back to the panel, see if you, I unfortunately didn't check in about responding to Judy, Cookby Judy and Cheryl, so if anyone wants to respond to that.
Sure. Maybe I just want to take a moment to sort of clarify the funding that goes to the province, just so that there's not any misunderstanding. So a couple of years ago, we signed the agreement to provide EMBC $3 million a year for 10 years and BC Wildfire Services $2 million a year for 10 years. So that's $5 million to provide all the frontline services that they provide to communities. That money is not being redirected to other communities. It's resources. I can assure you they've spent more than $5 million in response over the last 2 years, and I'm sure we'll have an advocacy for an increase in their formula before too long, because it has been such incredible seasons. But that is sort of to provide some of those frontline services, but I totally agree with all the comments here that there needs to be more at the community level, and that's what hopefully together we can advocate for, because the two have to complement one another going forward. On the MOU, as we go forward, we're there to support and work with you on, as I say, establishing some of the structures that allow us to unpack some of the requests for funding and the needs that occur. There's a lot of other ministries other than EMBC and BC Wildfires that need to be at the table. Forestry, Land and Natural Resources. I know Cookby Ignace and others have been having lots of active conversations with them about land stewardship. All these issues are really crucial to ensuring that communities ultimately are safer. And so hopefully we can work through some of the bumps on the road, Cheryl, and ensure that we can get that agreement done and start with having some of those conversations that will have an impact and change the risk factor of communities going forward.
Thank you very much. We're going to go to microphone number 17, please.
Abananas, Chief Joe Alphonse, Selkotin, Tladinko. Just want to acknowledge being on Musqueam traditional lands for the prayers this morning. Thoughts, prayers to you guys' community, Chief Newski, Chief McLean. Thoughts to you guys, know what you guys been through. As 2017, I was in the same boat, so I guess that gave it the right to people that every community that went through this, I heard from them this summer. There is a need for First Nation organization to be more involved. You know, why are we relying on EMBC? Kick them bastards out of their room, they're useless. The funding that they get, like, why would Canada provide funding to them to look after us? I think we're capable of looking after ourselves. We don't need them, their training to know how to fight fire. We do that instinctively. I'll put any First Nation crew, I often say, I'll put up my crew against any crew in BC. I know my crew will come out on top. So when I go to their fire camp, you know, one thing they're better than us at is just staring at maps. You go to any fire and they stare at maps. Get out on the ground and fight the fires. But just a little word of advice for you guys' community, I think. Bring in counselors, bring in traditional healers, It's really important. Your community members, even a year after, I'm still bringing in counseling services for my community members. It is very traumatic for our people. That's the only thing we have. Those are our homes. So my advice is make sure you have the healers and don't forget your membership and what they may end up going through. You know, the need for First Nation, my only regret is I wasn't able or had the ability to travel to those communities. Build a fire guard, 200 yards in front of that, build another fire guard. Burn that down and burn everything in between. I told every community, don't worry about them trees. Them trees will grow back faster than INAC will build you guys new homes. We need to establish our own organization. Those dollars should be coming to First Nation. We need to establish our own First Nation or emergency response training facilities and whatnot. You know, what's happening out there is generations of mismanagement by non-Aboriginal government authorities. We have to take control of our own territories again to ensure that this stuff doesn't happen. So that's all. I'll keep it at that.
Thank you, Chief Alphonse, and I appreciate the passion and conviction that you feel. I kindly remind the Assembly to please not pull a Romeo Saganash and keep it to kinder terms. Thank you so very much. Microphone number 3, please.
Thank you for enjoying your comments once again, Joe. It's good for your assertiveness, and I certainly agree. And personally, as an evacuee myself, in the pipeline explosion that happened in Clayton, I certainly know what all the evacuees feel like, literally just taking the clothes on your back and getting out there and knowing full well that all your possessions are back there. And I know the psychological damage it has on the community of Clayton, and probably has that same effect on the First Nations communities in Tahltan and Notley and the other areas. And one of the things that, and when we're talking about using fire as a management tool and whatnot, and expanding fire season, but the other thing in terms of after effects is the issue of the hunting ban that Silcotin did in terms of the after effects of the fire. And I know McLeod Lake Indian Band has a desire to put a hunting ban out on the moose population, which is 50% of what it was back in 2017. And that's certainly certain your jurisdiction. And I know in Notley and the other territories in Burns Lake, there's a desire to have a hunting ban on moose population that's already stressed. The other after effects as well that reminds me is what had happened in the south from the fires of 2017 is the year later you get all these mushroom pickers. And I know there's First Nations communities out there that did a management of those areas that were picked and had fees and whatnot for those that were coming out in those territories. So that's something to be aware of. Another thing that in terms of this subject matter is in Prince George, we have many First Nations societies that came together to really assist those that were evacuated, because we know as a result of 2017 and now this year of the lack of resources that many of our First Nations community members that were evacuated. So we did have assist many of our First Nations communities, from simple things such as gas cards to issuing and bringing people out to issue status cards because they didn't have ID. And there are little things like that that our people didn't have that came to these evacuation centers. And other non-First Nations communities have insurance to take care of some of those. issues that they were dealing with, but our people didn't have those resources, so it was really important that we take note of it and create that space and access those resources for those people that came forward. And I want to acknowledge all those societies, Friendship Center, Pignata, First Nations Health Authority in Prince George, and the evacuation centers, to bring those things that we didn't think of, and it was really important. And you know, I think all the donations, I seen all the donations that went to the Burns Lake Band, all those people that came out and donated to those that were evacuated. And this year was unprecedented in terms of the amount of First Nations that were evacuated from these fires. So thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go to microphone number 18, please.
Waikashkal Halti Peace Nixil, Harvey McLeod, Chief Olmichum, Upper Nicola Band, Okanagan Nation. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, panel. It's good to hear the experience of a community going through some really troubling times. At Upper Nicola, we've had a 100-year flood 2 years in a row, 2017 and 2018 this year, and we're expecting to have another 100-year flood this next spring. We've learned a lot. We've learned a lot about the system and the process of how we can get a little bit of help to assist us through the months. We had to work with our community to ensure their safety and wellness. We learned the process, we learned the language. We've even trained our own emergency operations staff. We developed a relationship with Emergency Management BC, and we've developed a relationship with Catherine and her team. And as we move forward, our emergency plan, yes, we've had to change and amend. We've had to change and amend again this year because it covers some of the basic necessities that one has to go through to prepare and assist the community move to provide them services while we deal with the floods and possibly now with other emergency situations that may occur in our territory. One is fires and the other one is pipeline. We know that we've had a lot of discussions on the requirements of Upper Nicola, assisting our fire department to expand and have the capacity to deal with emergencies. That means upskilling our members to fill the many positions that we have in our fire department, but at the same time have the talk about developing the capacity with the infrastructure and capital that we're going to need to address the emergencies that will be happening in the territory. And yes, there was a lot of discussion and a lot of meetings regarding how we can assist the province and the feds and ourselves move forward and find ways and means to address the emergencies that are going to come up in our areas. We really need to keep that on the forefront, need to continue them discussions and eventually implement some of the recommendations that have come forward on how we can address it. It's not going to go away soon. And it's getting more difficulty and more scary every year because not only are we dealing with floods now, but we're dealing with landslides. We haven't had landslides in our area, but it's happening all around us. And there are a lot of communities impacted by landslides this past spring and this summer. So let's continue to have the dialogue and let's implement some of them recommendations. Let's find the resources to implement them recommendations. And I know that the people from Upper Nicola will be willing and to share and do the work that we have to do to see that that we're involved. We've talked for many years that we need unit crews, but it's just been talk. We've even talked about having S-100 training so we can fight the fires, and we were told, yes, we can give you the S-100, but you'll probably never be called to a fire. The qualifications and training requirements now to fight fires is more than 100, and we have to get on contractor lists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we want to work with the province and the feds to ensure that we have the capacity in our community to go out and respond to an emergency, and we're looking forward to having more discussions on how we can get that done right limit.
Thank you very much. Microphone number 1, please.
So maybe I'll just say that, you know, there's a theme through some of the interventions here about climate change and the issues that it's causing around, soil erosion, changing climate, and various other pieces. So I think there's a longer term discussion we need to have as well around structural mitigation. We don't have sufficient resources for that right now, but we need to look at some of the climate change adaptation funds and various other pieces. When you choose where you're building, you choose how close you're to the fire, how close you are to the coast. I mean, I've been to a number of communities now that are starting to say, we're not building this close to the coastline anymore. We're recognizing that it just puts us at risk. And there's a piece that, you know, we can do a lot around emergency preparedness, and it's essential that we do so, but we also need to look at what the long-term trajectories are on some of these things and ensure that we're supporting you in building smart communities so that you're hopefully less at risk as we go on. So I thank all of the interventions here. They're extremely thoughtful and heartfelt, and we will continue to push within our system, and I know I can count on the Leadership Council to do the same, and working with the province in terms of really continuing to make progress. I know it's never fast enough when you're dealing with this at the community level, but we need to keep a focus on this as we really need to make this a long-term plan to ensure that we are creating a more integrated system, but also supporting you at the community level to be better prepared in all aspects. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We have 2 more people remaining on the speakers list, and that would be 21 and then 20.
Warehouse, Pisnak Seal, Esquis Asiut. I want to begin by acknowledging the Musqueam people and expressing our gratitude for the wonderful hospitality and privilege of being here. I also want to thank the panel for their very vivid and graphic reports of their experiences during the last fire season and the impact it's had on their communities. I had an opportunity to go up into Fort St. James last summer to do a wedding, and we stopped in Prince George, and you know, I'm somewhat embarrassed about this. We checked into one of the hotels, Sandman, and we walked into the lobby, and it was just absolutely jam-packed with Indigenous peoples. And my first thought was it had to be a conference of some description. And everywhere I looked, there were people, and a lot of those people I met in the past and knew, and we go upstairs, and there's just dozens of kids running up and down the hall and whatnot. And then it finally dawned on me that these were evacuees, and that was the situation all throughout Prince George, as I understand it. At any rate, I want to offer a few comments, and I hope to be brief. This issue is far too serious for us to continue to think that you know, these are emergency situations. It's much bigger than that. Global warming and climate change will prove to be the challenge, the issue of our time. It's absolutely a crisis situation. It's not only happening here in North America and British Columbia, It's happening around the entire world, and all of us sit in our living rooms and watch the coverage of the hurricanes in the U.S., the hurricanes and typhoons around the world, and what happened to Puerto Rico and so on and so forth. And it's in the trillions of dollars in damage and so on and so forth. But what we're experiencing here in British Columbia is going to intensify. It's going to get worse. These are not one-off situations that are going to happen for 2 or 3 years and somehow magically it's going to get better. It's going to get worse. The temperature rise trajectory goes up basically on a 45-degree angle. And next summer, it will be hotter than the last summer. And the summer after that will be hotter than next summer. And there's nothing that's going to change that. The UN climate report that just came out essentially said, as Cheryl said, that we have 12 years to dramatically turn around the economy and curtail the fossil fuel contributions to greenhouse gas emissions and all major contributors. There's going to have to be a revolutionary change to how transportation is undertaken throughout the world. In some countries, they're banning internal combustion automobiles, and they're switching to electrical vehicles, and it's by legislation that they're doing this. And I'm talking about countries like India that have, several hundred million people. Here in North America, we need to understand, and governments need to understand, that the approach to these issues now is absolutely and totally insufficient, and we're going to learn that the hard way. Our communities have been asking for resource support for the last several years, coming through these devastating wildfire flooding events and whatnot, and there's been really no response to that because the government of Canada just doesn't have that kind of funding to make available to us in the amounts that are required to deal with the issues now. And we're going to have to do the best we can until governments begin to realize that this is indeed a crisis. Obviously, they don't. We have, the Prime Minister still promoting pipeline, tar sands expansion, and things of that nature, when we need to be switching to renewable energy sources. We have communities and fire guards and training and more equipment needed. What really concerns me is the second issue that we have to deal with is the territory. And Judith's question about what are the priorities of the province is a key issue, because the policy is if there are structures at risk, there is a focus of resources, and those fires are put out very quickly. When the fire is in a territory and there's no buildings or populated settlement areas, they allow the fires to burn. And Judith's second question is, where are we going to hunt? That's a very valid question when you look at the footprint of these wildfires and the devastation that it's caused. And so we have to challenge that priority of governments of just letting these fires burn. We've had probably half a dozen fires in Penticton last summer, and they were put out within minutes because there was an immediate mobilization of everything that could fly. And those fires were put out because of real estate issues, tourism issues, and so on and so forth. But the fires in the Smelkameen, they were allowed to be burned, and they're probably still burning because there's no structures involved, but ranchers lost a lot of cattle, and there's a lot of wildlife that were killed off in those fires. So I just want to emphasize the fact that landslides also are going to become a major issue. For every degree that the temperature rises, the atmospheric rivers that are above us develop the capacity to absorb 7 times more moisture up into the cloud systems, and that is released all at once. And that's why we have these cloud bursts after a long heat wave. And then we're faced with the landslides. That's going to continue to worsen. So it's a crisis, and it needs a crisis response. It needs a crisis legislated response. And the current approach, you know, is just insufficient and it's inadequate. And we'll learn that as we move into the next several summers. And I'm just hoping that we elect governments that understand the issues of climate change and global warming and the impact it's going to have on the citizens of this country. Thank you.
Thank you. Microphone number 20, please.
I'll try to delete the expletives.
Much appreciated.
But you know, we were in 2017, we were hit by the Elephant Hill fire. And we weren't notified about the threat of the fire. We found out by accident, but we took it upon ourselves to take action and to begin preparing our community, and we made the decision to evacuate our community ourselves. We said we can't wait for the government anymore. We have to take matters into our own hands, and we did. And fortunately that we did. We were able to stave off the fires from coming down into our community. But one of the things that happened during that fire is that we had a professional, our own Shuswap professional firefighting crew. What the Ministry of Forest had the thought, they took that crew and sent them way up north somewhere. And they were phoning back home. They said, "Hey, we're lost up here. We don't know where to go." You know? And what we were saying is, don't send the people away from their territory. Keep the people within their territory to help fight the fires within, because they know the land, they know the climate in the area, they know the valleys and streams, lakes, so they can more competently fight the fire at home. And so, you know, and we've got to, yes, and I agree, we've got to begin taking back our management tool. We as Indigenous peoples used to manage the forests, and one of our key tools was fire. Let's take that back. Don't ask. I've told the fire department in Kamloops, we're going to start burning. You either burn with us or get the hell out of the way, or I'll burn you up myself. You know, we've got to do that because it's too dangerous. They're threatening our lives, you know. And there's also, all while this year we weren't in the fire, in the Deadman Creek Valley, we suffered their lateral consequences because the smoke was coming from the north, from the east, and from the south. And in our valley, it just sunk there, and we were under, the gauge was something that goes from 1 to 10. We were at 40 for 6 weeks, and our elders were suffering. So there's that kind of lateral damage, that consequences of fires that we got to think about. But also, you know what angers me is our sister community, Slachtaus, Bonaparte. They had to make an instant split-second decision to save their community, and that was to bring their firefighters, their community members together to fight the fire. And as a result, they saved their community. No doubt about it. They saved their community from burning up. They expended $200,000, and they've still yet to be paid for that. But while the Elephant Hill fire was still smoldering in 2017, the federal government, right in front of our noses as shoe swaps, gave the Cattlemen's Association $20 million to compensate them for their losses. We have yet to be compensated. So it tells me that cows are more important than we as Indigenous peoples on this land. That's what that tells me. You know, Bonaparte, landslides is now happening. It's not if, it's happening now. The highway, Trans-Canada Highway near our community was blocked for a day because the mountains are being decapitated with the slides that are coming down the hill, both going into Cache Creek and going up towards Williams Lake. It's happening. And the road going over to Lillooet, the Bonaparte community over there, their houses, there's houses that are threatened. There's one person that they have yet to find that got caught up in the slide. That's happened. That danger is real, and it's happening. The Deadman Creek Valley, we had floods, spring, summer, fall, floods. The creek was running milky, and we're looking at, you know, it's frustrating to stand by and see all of this happening. So we've got to take control of the forests. We've got to re-engage in managing that forest. As far as I'm concerned, the Ministry of Forests has lost the moral authority to manage those forests. We got to get back in there and do it ourselves. So that's what we're doing. And we did. In terms of, I looked at, I asked around and found out what are the aftermath of the fire, and I found out that hundreds of people were going to be coming into the mushroom, Elephant Hill fire area to pick mushrooms. And I found out that way up north, where they were there, they left strewn hundreds of pounds of garbage and gallons and gallons of human waste in the forest that were just a mess. So I wasn't going to allow that to happen. I showed a video yesterday to try to encourage others to begin picking up on that. And we did. As a result, we were able to organize on our Secwepemc law, because I'll tell you what, there is no law governing the understory. There's no policy or laws. So you can occupy that field. We, as Secwepemc, have moved to occupy that field. We did our declaration of ownership and jurisdiction, because the understory is where our medicine plants are, where our foods are. That's where the wildlife live. So we've taken it over to manage that and protect that and try to regenerate it in a good way. What we did is we took out, excuse me. I know you're the chairwoman. I appreciate you, but I will.
Thank you.
But this is important. What we took out of that mountain was 1,500 pounds of garbage and 13,000 liters of human waste. 15,000 pounds of garbage and 13,000 gallons of human waste we took off that mountain. Because we went up there, we provided garbage cans and porta potties for those pickers, and we got them to buy licenses from us in order to buy and to pick and to camp. We controlled it and we managed it, but we can do more. This was just an entry point, and I think that we got to take a look at that.
Thank you, Cookbee.
For managing the forest. We got to take over and manage the forest. I'm not waiting around.
Thank you.
I'm moving forward on that, and we all need to do it together. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you very much to our panel. Thank you for, I knew this would take time to hear from the floor, as you're all affected in a variety of ways. I had indicated to Regional Chief the likelihood of sticking to the time frame was very unlikely. Thank you to each and every one of you for indulgence. Thank you to Chief McLean, Chief McLean, Chief Nusky, and as well as Catherine Lappy. Have a little token of appreciation to each of you. We're going to go immediately into the resolution after we excuse the panel. So if you want to pull out your late package, we're going into the very last resolution, the support and principle that I mentioned earlier. Thank you. I appreciate your passion, Cookbee. I thank you for refraining from the language. I regret having to cut you off, but I trust you understand we have a lot of things to get through. At this time, we're turning to support and principle for tripartite MOU between the FNLC, Indigenous Service Canada, and Emergency Management BC, BC Wildfire Services. We are looking for a mover and a seconder. This has been previously presented at and passed at the Union of BC Indian Chiefs as well as the First Nations Summit. We did already hear some pre comments on this resolution, and we're looking for a mover and a seconder at this time. So we are on to in your package, it's the last resolution. Thank you. Microphone number 10, please.
Chief Donna Aljam Nickman Bet.
Thank you, Chief Donna, for the mover. I am looking for a seconder. Microphone 15, please.
Judith Sayers, New Charlotte Tribal Council. Second.
Are you a proxy in that position? No, at this time we haven't moved to the member delegate situation, so we are looking for, so under the old standing rules, we do need a chief or proxy. So we are looking for a chief or proxy at this time for a seconder, so we'll strike that from the record. Thank you for stepping forward. We're getting ahead of our newly adopted rules, so looking for a seconder. Chief Bob Chamberlain just gave me the wave, thank you. It was an official wave, I swear. So we are, this is something that you have had a chance to look at the Union of BC Indian Chiefs as well as the First Nations Summit. I am going to go directly into the therefore be it resolved. Yes, microphone 20, please.
Chief Judy Wilson, I just wanted to make a friendly amendment to the resolution.
Okay, I'm going to read this one into the record first, and then we'll get to the friendly.
I think that's the friendly amendment.
We'll read what they have in front of them first. Unfortunately, we didn't get the friendly amendment or the change prior. So, therefore be it resolved that the BC Chiefs and Assembly support in principle the BCAFN entering into a tripartite memorandum of understanding between the UBCIC and the First Nations Summit, working together as a First Nations Leadership Council, the Government of Canada, represented by Indigenous Services Canada, and the Government of British Columbia, represented by Emergency Services Management BC and BC Wildfire Services. 2, the BC Chiefs and Assembly direct the BCAFN Regional Chief to work with the First Nations Summit and the Union of BC Indian Chiefs to negotiate the tripartite MOU with Canada and BC on emergency management with the assistance of the First Nations Emergency Services Society of BC, focusing on Indigenous specific needs and values, addressing both governance and operations, respect for Indigenous land-based knowledge, and inherent responsibilities to their land and to their people. 3, the BC Chiefs and Assembly direct the BCAFN Regional Chief and staff to call on the federal and provincial governments to provide permanent, reliable, and appropriate funding to the FNLC, FNESS, and other like-minded organizations to be full and equal partners in this MOU, and also for substantive and meaningful funding to support First Nations to enhance their physical and human resources capacity, and that the BC Chiefs and Assembly directs the BCAFN Regional Chief to work with other members of the First Nations Leadership Council and the First Nations Emergency Services Society to provide regular reports to the UBCIC Chiefs Council. So I will first go to the mover and a seconder for any comment at this time. So that would be, you're good, and Chief Bob Chamberlain. Chief Bob, you're good? All right, now we'll go to you on Cookbee Judy Wilson on microphone number 20, please.
I just wanted to add a friendly amendment. Speaking to what Judith Sayers was saying, adding a number 5, therefore it be resolved that the BC Chiefs and Assembly fully acknowledge and support Chief Maureen Chapman and George Abbott's April 2018 report addressing the new normal 21st century disaster management in British Columbia, and call upon the province of BC and Canada to fully implement recommendations from this report.
Thank you. I did get a signal from the staff that they already received that, and I'm checking with their mover. You fine with that? Our seconder, Chief Bob Chamberlain. You fine with that?
Yes.
Thank you very much. You good? Okay. So is any other further discussion needed on this resolution as just amended? Resolution support and principle for tripartite MOU between the FNLC, Indigenous Services Canada, and Emergency Management BC, BC Wildfire Services. Microphone number 15, is that the closest one? Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to those that presented this morning. Thank you. I'd just like to know that if the chiefs in assembly here would like or would be willing to include the coastal nations' concerns with our ocean-going people and searches that are going on. Is that included in? Can that be included in the resolution? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Is there a specific area that you're looking for an amendment, or we're just checking on the language?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Yeah, if there's language in there, but I'd like to have it more specific that it does include the coastal nations and ocean-faring nations.
Okay, so that looking for a specific friendly amendment or someone to speak to this. Yes, microphone number 10, please. Microphone 10.
Hadection 11, Cookby, Donna, Aljam, Ntlekup Nation, Nikman. I'd like to thank the Musqueam for hosting us here on the territory and the elder for the prayer this morning. Just reading along in the second, therefore be it resolved, it explains there that the specific needs and values addressed by both government and operations, I believe, covers that area, even though it's not specifically bulleting that request.
Did you catch that? Does that satisfy what you're requesting? Yep. Not, 15, please. 15?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not quite.
Well, this is where we're asking.
Yes, not quite.
And perhaps, are you able to respond to? So we're just going to check in with Cheryl Casimir to see if there was an area that she's familiar with that perhaps. 19.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think sticking with that same, therefore be it resolved number 2, we can expand it to include where it goes further, where it says respect for Indigenous land-based knowledge. I think we include that, or we expand it to include water or marine, oceans, whatever the preferred language is, and then even add it where it says inherent responsibilities to their land include water or oceans, whatever the correct term is, and then it would be all-encompassing in that number 2.
Perfect. So I'm just looking, because we're still working out this friendly amendment, we're going to go back over to 15. So what's the preferred? Marine, aquatic?
Sure. Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that. Thank you.
What would be the preferred? Marine or aquatic or water or?
Not aquatic. I would probably say marine.
Marine.
Yes. Thank you.
So Indigenous land and marine-based knowledge. So we're like in the therefore be it resolved. Under number 2, the last line would be respect for Indigenous land and marine-based knowledge and inherent responsibility to their land and water. I say land, water, and peoples. Is it fine with the water added in? So just thinking it. So land, water, and peoples. So it's inclusive. Just going to check in over with the mover and the seconder. So with the addition of marine and water, so marine for knowledge base and water for responsibilities, yes. And to our seconder, yes, thank you. Now we'll go over to, is it microphone 20 that you have? Microphone 20, please.
Chief Ron Ignace, what I want to in the resolution, you know, the issue that we're confronting here, listening to the way what I saw and experienced through the fire, our community experience, listening to what all experience from the fire, the issue here is a systemic problem. And I think that if there's a way that we can have this resolution address a review of the legislation and the policies that are dealing with emergency preparedness and management, I think that's where we need to go. We need to go to the heart of that and review at that level. And I don't know how, I didn't have any wording to add to it, but if there's a way that we can consider that in the resolution.
So Cookby, Cookby Judy brought up amendment, which was therefore be it resolved number 5. That was about some review. I don't have the exact language in front of me. Is that inclusive? Can you confirm that or just review that? I don't have that in front of me. I'm looking around.
I think it was looking at just adding recommendations to the Chapman Review, I believe is what it was about.
So it's just specific to the Chapman Review?
Yeah, and if that could include the legislative and policy review to address the systemic problems that we're confronted with.
So as I don't have the wording in front of me and you do, Cookby Judy, I'm just going to turn to you just to make sure we can see where that extra friendly amendment can be made. Thank you, extra friendly. Thank you for your cooperation.
Yeah, Cookby Dr. Ron did talk to me about it earlier. I think just adding that number 5 would have been the BC Chiefs in Assembly fully acknowledge and support Chief Maureen Chapman and George Abbott's April 2018 report addressing the new normal 21st century disaster management in British Columbia and call upon the province of BC and Canada to fully implement recommendations from this report. And then you could add another line including the federal and provincial legislative and policy review, a review to that effect.
Yeah. I got a nod that we got our staff who has that, and I'm checking in with my mover, my seconder, and for the recommendation, you're comfortable with that? Okay, wonderful. Is there a need for further discussion on this resolution? Seeing none. Okay, thank you for the question being called. Is there any abstentions? Is there any opposition? With your permission, I declared it passed by consensus. Thank you very much. At this time, we're going to call forward for the Chilcotin National Government, Chief Joe Alphonse and Chief Jimmy Lulua to please join me here to my right. So please help me in giving them a welcome. So again, that would be Chief Joe Alphonse and Chief Jimmy Lulua. And we have mystery guest number 3. I'd like to know who this is, please.
I'm just the clicker. Is that okay?
Yeah. As we're late in day 3 and we have a lot to get through, I get nervous about mystery guests. He's looking after the tech aspect. Thank you so much. We'll start off with microphone number 2 with Chief Joe Alphonse. Oh, microphone number 1 with Chief Jimmy Lulua.
Bananas, everyone. Seat Jimmy Lulua, Hanigutin Desni, Hanigutin Nitzil-in. My name is Jimmy Lulua from Nimai Valley. I'm from the Chilcotin Nation. Just like to acknowledge and thank the Musqueam for allowing us to gather here today, and for the elder who opened today with the prayer. Also for, I've been here the past 3 days. I'd like to thank the cooks Not sure anybody thanked the cooks yet, but past 3 days have been pretty amazing, so quickly thank to them. So today we're here to keep losing my slide here. So we have the wildlife management and jurisdiction presentation today. I'm given strict orders from our tribal chair. I'll follow suit. I'm the youngest chief out of the 6 communities. We have 6 communities. Tsalkotin is Chief Joe, Glasgow, Tusi, Unisaitin, and Estila, it's Idal Del, and myself, Hanigutin. So today I'm speaking about our Klatsasin Memorial. We have our war chief been exonerated provincially and federally. Federally, we come in soon to our tidal lands. That's invitation only. It's meant for our people, and it's a big event for our nation. It's been 154 years coming, and this is one of the biggest events for I think not only us, but for First Nations people right across Canada. This Friday, we have our Klatsasin Memorial, which is our head war chief. The Chilcotin War happened back in Butte Inlet when surveyors and people were coming in and threatening our people. As Indigenous people or First Nations people, however you want to word them, when you threaten our women, you threaten our sacred sites, you threaten our hunting, our fishing. We're mandated. I say we're mandated to protect our land, and that's what our war chiefs were doing. Our warriors were trialed as murderers, not as heroes to our people. So, this exoneration means a lot, as our elders and they passed on this story from generation to generation to us, and we carried that. So now that this event is coming, this is the first step from our tribal chair to say we'll negotiate with Canada after they exonerate our war chiefs. So our memorial for Klatsasin Memorial is this Friday. It'll happen in Quesnel, where our war chiefs were hung, 5 of them, and the other one was hung down here in New Westminster the year after 1865. But the province has exonerated our war chiefs in 2014, and the federal March of this year, 2018, we were down in Ottawa. Some of you might have seen that event. So Aboriginal title, we, as Hanigutin, and I'm the caretaker area for title. I'm the youngest chief out of all of them, and I've inherited a big responsibility of leading, but at the same time, I have one of the best teams I've ever come across, and with the lead of our tribal chair and then the negotiations team and our community, all the frontline workers. We've been doing this for 25 years plus. And the non-native way of fighting a war through court systems and on paper. But our war chiefs have started this. 154 years ago, they went to war. They went to war by what they were mandated by. Mandated to protect our Tsalkotin then, our Chilcotin lands. And they've always been, and it's up to us to follow suit as leaders. This title case began 25 years ago at a roadblock that a logging company was trying to come into our area, and they were just following suit as government tells them. They give them a piece of paper, tell them you have a permit to log in this territory, but they've never ever consulted us. And 25 years ago, our people always knew that this was our land, and they stood up those rights, told them they couldn't come into our territory. So many of those elders are gone now, and I wish they would. Some of them are still here, that they will see this exoneration event, and they will see, I guess, Canada's big chief, whatever we want to call him, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, will be coming into tidal lands to give that exoneration this year to our people. That's the real apology that our people will accept. So if you don't know what title is, it's land that we own. We have the right to benefit. We have the right to use it, enjoy it, and profit. That's what title is. And we've always done that. And when you have title, you have to be able to show authority, take care of that lands. And we have a ranger program. See the picture here, those are, I call them ambassadors. They're the ones who greet people to your territory. We, as a young chief, I rely on relationship, not only from government officials, provincial and federal, but from my neighbors, lodge owners, neighboring communities, neighboring nations, First Nations people. I rely on relationship. That's the strongest form of jurisdiction. I think, when we're all working on the same page, and that's how you show real jurisdiction. But in my opinion, I rely on that relationship, and that's very important. I feel like I get way further when I have a partnership, when I share decisions. If you want to talk about governance, shared decision is title, or decision making, law making. That's governance. I've been sitting here for the past 3 days. I've been hearing a lot of issues, and I deal with that day to day. I have title. I walk a road that people are still dreaming of, but at the same time, it's tough. It's not easy. I'll tell you that. But at the same time, when you have those relationships, you have those connections. I'm young, so I came in at a really, really strong time where our nation's at its strongest. We have the strongest team out there, I feel like, in my opinion, because, we have 6 chiefs who sit down together. We're a nation. We share decisions. We might not all get along, but at the end of the day, we know that we have to in order to be strong. As Indigenous chiefs, First Nations chiefs, it's not easy. We tease each other about overlap. But at the end of the day, who owns that land? Not us. I can tell you provincial and federal own that land. So we'll argue over these lines that don't exist. As Indigenous people, lines never existed. But it's up to us to work together, and that's some advice from probably, I don't have a lot of, I've been chief for 8 months, but as a young, educated, I grew up on the land. I grew up by my parents. I know how to fish, I know how to hunt. I've been raised really traditionally, so I understand the importance of land. Right now, how I look at title is, can you be sustainable with the land that they give you? If no federal funds or provincial funds were given to you, could you be sustainable? I look at the area that I'm in. Pretty fortunate that I can do that. I have salmon barren streams, big lakes, lots of trees yet, because we protected that. If the emergency moose protection law, I'm fortunate to have great leaders in our nation. This was more led by Chief Joe, but we followed suit, and this is a great initiative. For us, we have very limited funds when it comes to ranger programs. We struggle like anybody else, but we make sure that we protect our area, protect our moose, protect our fish. We're mandated by that. Our war heroes who paid the ultimate sacrifice showed examples of that. So I'm mandated to follow the exact same thing. But now we use, in tidal lands, I use alternative ways of monitoring the land, where I use checkpoint systems, where I use alternate energy, like what do you call those, solar panel systems with batteries. We're off the grid. Where we live, we're about 700 kilometers north of here. We're basically just over the mountain as the crow flies. So I use checkpoints, and I use steel gates because I have limited roads in where I'm from, so I can manage. So we use that to manage the LEHs that have been given out this year. like I said earlier, you know, we have title. This is a big game changer, as many people stated. You know, I was fairly young when this happened. You know, I was sitting on my horse, riding on our land when I heard of it. You know, and people were asking me what I thought. I said, you know, we wouldn't expect anything less. We knew we were going to win. We've always known this was our land. Our warriors paid the ultimate sacrifice to preserve this for future generations. You know, we're bound by the 7th generation law in Tsalkotine law, and I'm pretty sure it's no different right across Canada. We're bound by that law to protect for the 7th generation. So everything that we have, 7 generations from now, they have it too. Earlier we were talking about child and family. One of the chiefs were talking about, and I said, you know, yeah, it's a law that's built into us. We're mandated. If you want to talk government policies and whatever, you know, that's how we look at it. We have the most consistent sockeye run, in our opinion, on the Fraser River. You know, we have at least 1 million fish return every year to the Chilko River. Tidal lands is where the nursery for sockeye, chinook return every year, and steelhead. Steelhead are endangered now. So earlier we were talking about fisheries, and you know that's a big talk about mandates a while ago. If you want a war, you threaten our fish, you threaten our hunting, you threaten our women, you threaten our sacred sites. You got a fight on your hands, and I'm pretty sure that's what's coming. That's how Tsalkotine look at it. That's how my elders have always told us. You know, we've been threatened by Taseko mines. That's been threatening our community for quite some time, and you know we're looking to put the lid on that. You know, we're starting to get sick of sitting in court with them. But we beat them in the white man way, where you go to court, beat them twice, highest level of court, federal environmental assessment, beat them twice, and they're still in there. We're still going to court. How many times you got to beat a person to tell them that they're defeated? You know, we've beat them up so many times that, you know, I'm surprised they keep getting back up. You know, they must be part Tsalkotine. You know, we're pretty stubborn. You know, but out of all those struggles, you know, we do have a lot of good things coming our way. You know, we have signed a Nankani Deni Accord. You know, under that accord is, you know, governance, health, justice, you know, housing, forestry, you know, a lot of good things, you know, a lot of good talk. But at the end of the day, it comes down to action. We have seen little of it. Some, it's getting there, I think. But you know, when we come to this kind of forums, you know, that's where we're showing the way. At the same time, we're looking for support. You know, we're looking for support and resources. And we share knowledge, you know, as, you know, just like our culture, we share it. We don't hoard it. You know, we share what we have. And last, I'm going to finish off with the moose protection law. You know, it's a big challenge for us. You know, as everyone stated earlier, you know, our fish, our moose and stuff have been declining for a long time, and you know, our community passed, or our nation passed a moose law to ban all LEHs out of the area. And even on our own people, you know, no cow moose hunts. So we have to enforce it on our people, and that's a big thing to do, because it's really hard when you tell your people who live in poverty they can't shoot moose. They're going against their own rights to hunt and fish and to benefit off the land. That goes against our own ways. But in order to protect it, we have to do these things. So, you know, with that, you know, we couldn't wait. Earlier, you guys were saying you couldn't wait for government to step up. You know, if we wait too long, we won't have any fish. We won't have any moose. We have to take initiative and be the ones to lead the way. You know, even David Suzuki himself says, you know, environmental and fishing and hunting should be left to First Nations people, because we've been doing this for time immemorial. So, I think Chief Joe has way more than I have to offer for moose management, and, he's the community that's been leading by example. I have a lot of respect for this guy sitting next to me, and, with that, I want to pass it over to our Nitsi Tribal Chair, Chief Joe. Sa
Abananas, morning again. Thank you. Acknowledge that we're on Musqueam territory and allowing us to do business on their lands. Here today to share update on our moose initiatives, I guess. I guess it's appropriate that we're doing this presentation right after the fire presentations, because this is a spin-off from the 2017 fires that really pushed us to need to do this. When I look at those fires, 2017, INAC still owes my community $1.2 million. When you see that passion, that's where that stuff is coming from. You want to get my blood boiling, you try to control me and my people. We won't tolerate that. Every avenue we have, we want to assert our jurisdiction. Having Aboriginal title gives us freedom. We can enter agreements with the province, Canada. But if things don't work out, we'll still hit the road. If we're in a treaty process and we're not allowed to do those things, will be us, not under this process. We have to. We spent 3 years negotiating with BC over this moose stuff. And 3 years, a lot of times we come to an agreement, and with the politicians in place. But after you come to that agreement shifts over to the bureaucrats, and it dies. Like, that's a very arrogant government. Like, I've even had some of the bureaucrats tell me that, oh, those politicians, they don't run government, we do. They're a very unorganized group. Very unorganized. Under Liberal government, provincial government, I think we're moving quite aggressively and dealing with issues. Since the changeover, actually, from the Chilcotin point of view, things almost come to a complete halt with the NDP. I don't know if that's the NDP being inexperienced. Sometimes somebody poses as your friend that's not really the best person. But we've had our challenges with the NDP. I don't know how it is with everybody else, only speaking from our point of view. And I would say they're very unorganized. And I'm going to talk to them in a way. I tell them I'm going to talk to you guys in a way. And if you don't listen to that, I'm going to try to do things in a polite way, in a legal way, in your language. But if I don't get what I want, I'm not going to keep doing the same thing over and over and over again if it doesn't work. This year we implemented start bringing back our own laws. Our moose laws, ban LEH, make sure that we have full nation support from all of our membership, from our hunters, from our women, everyone. We passed it. We passed that internally. As Indigenous people, nations, we have the right to create our own laws, our our own rules. And if you're going to challenge government, you better make sure you do those things before don't just run off half-cocked. You know, one advantage I have is government always underestimates me. Every time I turn around, whatever, oh, they're nothing. Yet we've won title. Nobody's done that anywhere. Multi-billion-dollar company, Taseko Mine, twice they've gone at it with, twice I beat them. There's only one thing consistent with all of our fights. I've been in the middle of every one of them. So if they want to underestimate, well, that's fine. You know, in my community, Tlatinko, NM community, I'm 5th generation chief. I come from a hereditary family. Come from Chief NM line. I'm not the hereditary chief. My cousin Kirby is. My grandfather Casimir was chief for 33 years. My teachings in leadership started when I was 8 years old. You know, so well rehearsed in our traditional laws and our traditional ways, and how do we bring that back? The strongest policies we have, we take our old laws like that and we bring it back and we roll it out in a modern way. You want to get community support on any issue, you bring back an old law. You roll that up. 2017 fires, for example. A lot of our members never came back, our staff. But all of our financial reports from INAC and health, you know, First Nations health and all that are still required. But our band manager is not back, our health director is not back. So we have to take what we had in our community and reappoint and abolish the band office, abolish the health department. We created one organization, our emergency operations center. Our community didn't really know what to do. I said, this is like the old, before contact we had lots of different chiefs. Hunting chief, fishing chief, so on and so forth. And hunting chief says when and where to hunt. Nobody questioned it, they followed it. Same thing with the berry picking chief, political chief. But we also had a war chief. And when that war chief, and when there was a threat to our nation, a threat to our women, our elders, our youth, our territories, everybody became subordinate to the war chief. EOC is our war chief. Our community members, wow, talk about, I've never seen so much people buy into. So you always make sure to bring that. So we did that. And I said, well, 3 years, this year I'm not even interested in going to the province. I'm not interested in negotiating. I don't want to waste my time. They wasted my time 3 years in a row. I'll wait. But the team, our lawyers, our legal team, they went on. Jay Nelson and the other chiefs, they negotiated, they sat. And even when we didn't agree with them, the province turned around and issued media release saying that they come to terms with the Chilcotin. I was like, I don't think so. I don't think so. I said, I'll wait till 2 weeks before hunting season and then I'll speak. So I went to the 2 major logging roads in our territory. In my community area, half the Chilcotin population come from my community. My community is 2,000 people. But I have the smallest caretaker area out of all the Chilcotin communities. You know, all the other communities are all on the outskirts. They have large caretaker areas. So we have to be very aggressive in protecting our area. I think in In about 6 years, we deactivated 350 login roads, secondary login roads, to prevent access in our territory. So I just pulled our login roads, main login roads, pull the cattle guards, put up signs. I'm going to take ownership here. We've done our homework. We've passed our laws, consulted with our community. Here it is. You know, as chief, a lot of times you have a lot of people in your community vying for your title. I don't know. Anybody want to come forward and stand in with me? I had 4 of my counselors. Nobody wanted to get in that picture with me. So to make you guys famous, we'll get on social media and Williams Lake, speak up, Redneckville. Nobody wanted to come on. You know, we did that, and you know, it's amazing. Amazing, boy. That language they understood. I didn't even have to call them. Minister phoned me at home, 9 o'clock at night. I need to talk to you. Well, we'll set up a time and a place to talk then. We did. I talked to lawyer Jay and Nelson, and I said, well, we'll just sit and listen. We don't really know what's going to come of this conversation. 20 minutes into the conversation, he said, what do you want? I want co-management. I want conservation enforcement. I want a wild horse program. I want a predator control program. I want to have roundtable discussions with all users in Williams Lake. He didn't even blink an eye. It was like, just as I was done, he said, done. So why the hell are we forming all these negotiation process and spending months and years talking about these things? 20-minute conversation, it was done. The only thing we had to agree on was the dollar figure. You know, I said, this is only a start. You want to go and backfill that? Well, then I'm going to send my crews back up there. And not only am I going to pull those cattle guards, I'm going to pull plows in there, and I'm going to frickin' plow every last logging road in my territory. Now you're going to affect logging. Now you're going to affect recreation sites. I said, you guys have built those roads without my consent. You want to go to court? Let's go. Let's go. You need to have our consent in order to have that now. They didn't want to go down that road. So, you know, I'm happy to say, you know, that sometimes you have to rock that boat, push that envelope. You know what? Definitely go to Williams Lake. You just get on the social media site there. You'll find myself as a favorite topic. But I counted on that. You know, we did that, and I wanted a big push from the local rednecks, and I got it. You know, the ministers got it too. And they were willing, no more BS. Right on the phone with Forest Minister, I said, you better mean business. You're still running with all these bureaucrats that you inherited from the Liberal Party. You better clean house. Those bureaucrats right on the phone with the minister when I said that. I'll make no bones. I'll tell them exactly what I think. So I think it's important. It's Aboriginal title, Aboriginal rights. It's an attitude. You have to believe it. Don't accept any answer that, you know, I'm not going to accept no for an answer. You know, and we have to be involved in every aspect of our territories. Every decision. If we don't, we're going to continue to see forest fires and the likes of those things. You know, and if anyone wants to see those agreements or have any further discussions, more than open to sharing what we have. I think as First Nation people, we need to share amongst each other. When we're up against industry, industry does that all the time with us. We need to use their tactics and be there to support each other. And, you know, I'm passionate about these things, and I will push as hard as I can to get what we want, because where we've been as Indian people hasn't been, you know, a good place. So I thank you guys for taking the time and hearing me out.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Chief Alphonse and Chief Renewal. I know you have many things you manage. I have token of appreciation to you both. This time I'll give it to you in just a minute. We do actually have a late resolution that is in regarding the Chilcotin Nation Wildlife Management and First Nations jurisdiction. We're going to deal with that, and then we're going to deal with the remainder of our resolutions. So if you want to pull that one out, that is the actual last late resolution of the resolution package, Chilcotin Nation Wildlife Management and First Nations jurisdiction. So I think we had a very good introduction to what this is pertaining to with the presentation we have just heard. So with your permission, I'm going to seek first a mover and a seconder and get into therefore be it resolved. So I am looking for a mover for the Chilcotin Nation Wildlife Management and First Nations jurisdiction. This is part of your late resolution package. It is the last resolution in the package. Microphone 19 and then microphone 17, please.
Chief Dan George, Burns Lake Band, also moved.
Thank you, Chief Dan George. And microphone 17, please.
Second, Chief McLean, Taltan.
Chief McLean, thank you, Chief McLean. Therefore, be it resolved that the BC Chiefs in Assembly fully support the effort of the Chilcotin Nation to to protect their wildlife, and will support and stand with the Chilcotin Nation in defense of their lands and resources and efforts to advance legislative and other reform that recognize First Nations as decision makers in their respective territories. 2, the BC Chiefs in Assembly support all BC First Nations who are taking action and demanding new frameworks for wildlife management and decision making in their respective territories. 3, the BC Chiefs in Assembly direct the Regional Chief to advise BC and the Minister of Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development that the First Nations across the province are watching the progress and outcome of the Chilcotin Co-Management Agreement closely and expect a serious shift in BC's approach to how decision-making occurs. And 4, the BC Chiefs in Assembly direct the Regional Chief to continue advocating on behalf of the Chilcotin Nation and publicly communicate the clear support of the BCAFN Chiefs in Assembly for the Chilcotin Nation's efforts to protect their wildlife and advance recognition of First Nations as decision makers. So just turning first to my mover to see if a further comment at this time. Microphone 19, please.
I'd just like to thank Joe and Jimmy for your presentation. Another thing I'd like to discuss too is quad access for hunters, because deactivating roads does not stop the quads from getting into these territories. I know in Tanaka territory also they have grasses that they want to protect, and these quads go anywhere in their land and just wreck all the First Nations treasures that we have in our territories. But I think quads are accessing way too much ground. We've got all these cat guards around all of our territories now that are hundreds of miles long, and it's just given way too much access to too many areas in our territories. So I think quad banning should be part of the hunting also. Thank you.
Thank you. So microphone number 17. Seconder, do you have further comment? Yes, we do.
Just in support of the motion that our remote communities, a lot of our communities are heavily reliant on our moose populations, and that's our deep freeze out there. That's our Walmart. That's our supermarket, and this is a good step in moving towards the management, taking back the management from the province who have mismanaged it for so many years.
Thank you. Open the floor to further discussion on this resolution. Not seeing any need for further discussion, I'll move into question. Is there any abstentions to this resolution as presented? Seeing none, is there any opposition to this resolution? I am still caffeinated. Thanks for testing. So seeing no opposition, seeing no abstentions, I declare it passed by consensus. Thank you very much. With that, we're going to move into the very last resolution of our on-time resolutions, which is indeed at the end of your package, the last page, resolution number 17, support and principle for the development of a memorandum of cooperation between the BCAFN and the First Nations Major Projects Coalition. So just give you a minute to find that one. Again, it's the last page of your on-time resolutions package, number 17. I am looking for both a mover and a seconder. I'll go to microphone number 14, please.
Chief Willie Blackwater, Kizuyuka, I shall move.
Thank you, Chief Blackwater. As the mover, I am now looking for a seconder at this time. We'll go over to 19.
Chief Dan George, Burns Lake Band.
Thank you, Chief Dan George. As this has been part of your on-time package, and we're on the end of wrap-up of day 3, I'm going to go right into the therefore be it resolved. Therefore be it resolved that the BC Chiefs and Assembly support in principle the development and establishment of non-political, non-binding memorandum of cooperation and understanding between the BC Assembly of First Nations and the First Nations Major Projects Coalition Society, and 2, the memorandum of cooperation and understanding include the following principles and objectives: be of a non-binding and non-political nature, containing language respecting the uniqueness of each organization's mandates, focus on objectives and goals that relate to capacity building to advance shared economic and environmental stewardship priorities, agree to freely share information between organizations and inform each other of key meetings or other dates that relate to the core objectives and goals in the MOU, and agree to jointly advocate agree to jointly advocate for the interests of our respective members at times where our organizational goals and objectives align. So I'm going to check in with my mover to see if you have further comment to this resolution. You do? Microphone number 14, please.
I'm pleased to move this resolution for consideration by the chiefs in attendance here today, because it underscores the importance of us as First Nations and our ability to work together. Kizuyuka Band Council was one of the original members, is one of the original members of the First Nations Major Projects Coalition. We joined because we seen a benefit in working with other elected hereditary chiefs to advance our interests together. What started off as 11 First Nations in the initiation of this coalition, we now have 48 members, and 5 of them are from different provinces. Today, this resolution calls for establishment of a non-binding, non-political memorandum of understanding and cooperation to be developed by the BCAFN and Major Project Coalition in order to strengthen the relationship of our 2 organizations on matters concerning capacity building and tools necessary for informed business decisions. Over the past 3 years, the coalition has worked very hard to develop tools that can help our nation succeed in business by owning portions of the projects and by protecting our environment. These are big tasks that better accomplished when we work together rather than working alone. The tools and work we have completed are available to all First Nations to use at no cost. Both the BCAFN and the Coalition have lots to offer each other by strengthening our relationship and helping our members build capacity under which we can all succeed. Establishing this MOU will enable us to share our information and successes freely with each other. This is information you can choose to use. I'm quite honored and humbled to move this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, checking in with our seconder, Chief Dan George. Do you have further comment at this time? No. So then we're going to any further discussion on the floor. We're going to microphone number 20.
Chief Judy Wilson from Nisganis, the Clapham Nation. I just wanted to say under the whereas is an E, and I think it's not sure if it's under the therefore it be resolves, is that, you know, we have resource extractive industries that really impact our nation and our people. You know, the mines and the pipelines. The Trans Mountain Canada pipeline proposes to go through 513 kilometers of our nation. They've effectively divided our nation through Ian Anderson and all of the things that he was doing. You know, and I really like to say, you know, environment, what does that really mean in stewardship? Because a lot of these extractive industries impact our land, our water, and you know, we get very little economic return from them. So I have to say, I think I know the intent of this, and you know, to be involved, but there's some industries we will not be involved with. We're trying to, when we say renewable resources, what Grand Chief Stuart Phillip was talking about is getting away from the dirty fossil fuel industry and these extractive mining that impact us, because we have to be looking, if we are stewards, we need to be looking at protecting the earth and also looking, you know, at the impacts of climate change and global warming and not adding to it. So there's going to be a hard line we're going to have to take because of the emergency First Nations. We just heard the panel talking about the wildfires and the flooding and all the things that are happening to our lands, that we need to take a strong stand at this time. So I know the intent of it, Chief Willie, and I respect you, and I also respect Chief Dan George, but I can't support this because of you know, our strong feelings and the impacts we have towards these extractive resource industries that are impacting our people and our nation. I just wanted to put that forward.
Thank you. Is there a need for further discussion? Microphone number 15, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief Louis, how's it? Just for my own clarification here, Madam Chair, in therefore number 1, it says the BC Chiefs and Assembly support in principles, and just again for my clarification, is this to read support the principles?
I think it's supposed to be in principle, and I'm going to look to, yeah, in principle. There's a
in principle?
In principle, singular.
So there's an error?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, and I wasn't sure of that, but thank you for your clarification. If the mover and seconder read it the way I read it, then there should be a correction.
Yes, and thank you, and I believe when I read it out, I corrected it in my reading, but I didn't actually see the mistake there. So in print, I did micro-editing. So it is indeed, and we will just make that grammatical change to the BC Chiefs and Assembly support in principle the development. Yes. And just, I'm assuming that I'm just going to check in with the mover and seconder that you're fine with us fixing the typo. Yes, I got 2 head nods. Thank you very much, and thank you for raising that. Pardon me for my missing that slight typo. Is there other discussion needed at this time? Seeing none, going to question, is there any abstentions to resolution number 17? I noted the 1 opposition. Is there further opposition on resolution number 17? So noting the 1 opposition, this has been carried by majority. Thank you very much. We did actually have one other resolution in the on-time package. I'm sorry, I didn't see you raise your... Okay, so let the record show there was 2 opposition. That's still nonetheless a majority for it. Thank you very much. And raising your hand high would be great too. Thank you. Just need to know. So 2 opposition and rest by majority. Thank you. So we're going now to resolution number 15. Support for Indigenous Tourism BC. It was an on-time resolution, part of your on-time package. We are looking for a mover and seconder. I do realize we are going to have a presentation by them shortly, but we do want to look after all the resolutions now. So we're looking for a mover and a seconder for the Support for Indigenous Tourism BC. That would be Toby Joseph, Sayout First Nation, microphone 13. Thank you. I'm looking for a seconder. So resolution number 15, support for Indigenous tourism BC. Cookby Judy Wilson. Microphone 20, please.
Seconding the resolution on tourism.
Thank you very much, Cookby. So in this support, understanding that you actually have not heard the presentation but you've had a chance hopefully to review this resolution, we do remind you that Indigenous Tourism British Columbia was formerly known as Aboriginal Tourism BC. You may know them in a more familiar way as AT BC. And they're a provincial Indigenous cultural tourism, tourism sector organization established in 96-97. They have been doing a fair amount of work, as you can see, including a blueprint strategy. They have entered in declaration and protocol. And then they have talked about where they've gone since, particularly in 2017. So getting into the therefore be it resolved, putting on my non-editing glasses. Therefore be it resolved that the BC Chiefs and Assembly fully support Indigenous Tourism BC, ITBC, as the lead Indigenous provincial tourism organization, and their vision, mission, and implementation contained in their 5-year strategy titled Pulling Together 2017-2022, and the BC Chiefs and Assembly support in principle the development and establishment of non-political, non-binding memorandum of understanding between the BC Assembly First Nations and Indigenous Tourism BC. The memorandum of understanding includes the following purpose and commitments: respect for Indigenous people and our culture in the awareness, presentation, and promotion of Indigenous tourism products and services through the development of a mutually cooperative partnership in order to promote BC's Indigenous tourism industry. Promotion of the benefits and raising awareness of the importance of tourism to the Indigenous community in BC. Establish a collaborative relationship to achieve outcomes that are mutually beneficial to the BCAFN and ITBC that will support tourism-based communities, human resource and economic development in Aboriginal communities, support the promotion efforts of ITBC and work with the ITBC to build a strong and vibrant membership, collaborate on developing guiding principles and joint initiatives that support the development of Indigenous tourism in BC and enhancing the economic prosperity of Indigenous people, identify new and emerging opportunities together with other tourism industry partners to participate in research, promotion, and advertising initiatives and activities that benefit the Aboriginal tourism industry, and partner in joint planning sessions to integrate ITBC's marketing efforts on behalf of the Aboriginal tourism industry with BCAFN's economic development strategy for the benefit of an Aboriginal tourism industry. Turning to our mover, do you have a further comment this time? Turning to our seconder. Good. Opening the floor for discussion at this time on this resolution number 15. Seeing no need for further discussion, I'll move to question. Is there any abstentions to resolution 15? Is there any opposition to Resolution 15? Being extra careful. And seeing none, then I declared it passed by consensus. Thank you. Now going back to our late resolutions. We have the process for the BCAFN appointment to New Relationship Trust. Thank you again to Hugh Breaker, Chair, and to Cliff, the CEO of New Relationship Trust, for their presentation yesterday. They did make mention that there was a seat coming up in November for a BCAFN appointment, so this is about the process for that appointment. We are looking for a mover and a seconder on this late resolution. Okay, microphone number 10, please.
Chief Janet Webster, move.
Thank you, Chief Janet. Looking for a seconder? Number 16, please.
Chief Bryce Williams, Tawasin First Nation, second.
Thank you very much, Chief Williams. So we did hear quite a thorough presentation yesterday, so I'm going to go directly into the, there's a couple of typos, and this time I did spot them ahead of time. So when you look under, in the whereas of section E, it's the NRT has, there's missing an A, so not HS, but has a board of directors. And speaking of E, there's two E's there, that should be an F. And for the F, the current BCAFN representative, and in the last line, you see the NRT, there's missing a B for board, so it's the NRT board. So just changing the typo from the second E to an F, adding in the A for the NRT has, and adding a B to board. Getting into the therefore be it resolved. Therefore be it resolved, the BC Chiefs Assembly call on the BCAFN to develop and circulate a call-out notice to BCAFN membership seeking interested individuals to serve as a BCAFN representative on the New Relationships Trust Board of Directors starting December 1st, 2018 to November 30th, 2021, and to the BC Chiefs and Assembly mandate the Regional Chief and the BCAFN Board of Directors to review applications of interested individuals and based on criteria and core competencies as per the New Relationship Trust terms of reference for Board of Directors, the Regional Chief and the BCAFN Board of Directors, there should be directors, not director, adding an S there, determine and appoint the BCAFN representative. So one more typo to correct, and that would be directors. So turning to my mover at this time, do you have further comment? No. Turning to my seconder, further comment at this time? No. Is there need for further discussion on this resolution process for BCAFN appointment to New Relationships Trust? Seeing none, going to question, is there any abstentions? Seeing none, is there any opposition? Again, seeing none, with your permission, I note it as passing by consensus. Going on to the next late resolution, which is right after that one, support for the development and implementation of the deliverables of the BCAFN Sustainable Economic Development and Fiscal Relations Strategy. You did hear a report on that prior. So we are looking, and including from the champions table, so we are looking for a mover and a seconder at this time. Microphone number 9, please.
Chief James Hobart, Spousal First Nation.
Can you just say your last name again, please?
H-O-B-A-R-T, Hobart.
Hobart, thank you, Chief Hobart. You said it really fast. And to tell you, I've got Harry Pottered for a minute and went Hogwarts, and I knew that was wrong. So Chief Hobart, thank you. We are looking for a seconder. So this is support in regards to BCAFN Sustainable Economic Development and Fiscal Relations Strategy. We are looking for a seconder, and again, that would be Proxy Toby Joseph. Thank you very much for say out. We did hear a fair bit around the actual presentation and the work that's being done around the Sustainable Economic Development and the Fiscal Relations Strategy earlier during the annual general meeting, so I'm going to go directly into the therefore be it resolved. Therefore, be it resolved that BC Chiefs and Assembly support the continuation of the work identified in the BCAFN Sustainable Economic Development and Fiscal Relations Strategy. 2, the BC Chiefs and Assembly support the development and implementation of the following deliverables of the Sustainable Economic Development and Fiscal Relations Strategy: the Black Book Economic Development Toolkit, the Data Modernization Project, the Online Resource Center, including the community and regional profiles, and the Clustering Initiative. And 3, the BC Chiefs and Assembly support BCAFN in advancing the work with the First Nations Summit and the Union of BC Indian Chiefs as the First Nations Leadership Council, as well as engaging with BC and Canada on economic development strategies and initiatives that affect First Nations in BC. So turning to Chief Hobart, do you have further comment at this time? No. Turning to Proxy Toby Joseph, further comment at this time? No. Opening the floor to further discussion. Seeing no need for further discussion, is going to question. Is there any abstentions? Seeing none, is there any opposition? Seeing none, with your permission, I declare it passed by consensus. Just going to double check that that is all of the, did I get them all? Yahoo! Thank you very much. We got through the resolutions. And just a couple of updates. Unfortunately, Deputy Minister Bobby Plekas was fogged in and unable to make it over today to join us for the Clean Growth Strategy. But we are going to go to the next item on the agenda after that, which is justice, and that will be Rosalie Wilson, the BCAFN representative to the BC Aboriginal Justice Council, noting that unfortunately Doug White, who is the chair, was unable to join us. So please help me in welcoming Rosalie too. After Rosalie, we will be hearing from Indigenous Tourism BC and then some final comments from Regional Chief. So again, I turn it over, microphone number 3, to Rosalie, and welcome.
Thank you. Just go straight in? Okay. First and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge the Musqueam territory on whose lands we are meeting on today, as well as thank you to Regional Chief TG and the BCAFN Board of Directors and its appointment of my appointment for a 3-year term to the BC Aboriginal Justice Council. Chair Doug White sends his regrets today that he couldn't be here personally to provide the update, but I will do the best that I can in his absence. Please note, I've only been appointed since August, so if there's any questions that I'm unable to answer, I will certainly bring those back to the Justice Council and provide appropriate follow-up where I can. So a little bit about me. My name is Rosalie Wilson. My current married name is Yazi. I'm from the Syilx and Secwepemc Nations. I'm also a practicing lawyer located in Syilx territory at West Bank, BC. And I just wanted, perfect. Oh, okay, perfect. My PowerPoint is up here. The PowerPoint is just pretty much broken up into three different sections, and there's more detail there. I'm not sure if it's been circulated as of yet, but I'm sure that BCAFN staff will make that available in terms of having materials to take back to your communities. So the presentation is broken up into 3 sections. One is the background of the Aboriginal Justice Council, 2 statistics of overrepresentation of Indigenous peoples in the justice system, and current Justice Council key activities and initiatives. So I'm not going to take too much of your time because I know that I'm in a highly coveted spot presenting right before lunch, and I can see it at the back there. So I'm more than happy to, just provide a general global perspective and then move quickly into questions and comments. So a little bit about the Justice Council. The issues of the Aboriginal Justice Council that they are mandated to address includes the overrepresentation of our people in jails and children in care, which are two of the greatest crises facing our communities today. It's imperative that the Justice Council create opportunities and pathways of transformative justice change or transformative change to make real difference in the lives of our people struggling with the criminal justice system and child and family systems. We have a historic opportunity through the MOU signed in September of 2017 with BC to create for the first time an Indigenous justice strategy. Our goal at the Justice Council is to have this work completed by the summer of 2019. And initiated in 2007, the Justice Council productively engages the government to advance effective strategies that can better achieve outcomes for Indigenous peoples involved in the justice system. The Justice Council works to challenge approaches that contribute to the growing overrepresentation of Indigenous children and youth in provincial care and the overrepresentation of Indigenous women and men who are incarcerated. Resolutions were passed in 2007 by the 3 First Nations Leadership Councils supporting the concept of a BC First Nations Justice Council. Reinitiated in 2013 by the Court Workers Association, resolutions were passed by the First Nations Summit, UBCIC, and BCAFN to reaffirm their support and direct the respective political executive and staff to work towards the establishment of the Justice Council. Currently, the Justice Council is comprised of 7 members. With the court workers acting as the host agency. There's 1 council member appointed from each of the respective political organizations of the First Nations Leadership Council and 3 independent representatives with expertise in Indigenous justice. Independent representatives are jointly appointed by all the respective organizations involved in the council. So the current members of the Justice Council include these 7 names up here. The new term started in September of this year for a 3-year term. So moving to the statistics of overrepresentation here, some of the current facts that the Justice Council is working on. So in terms of over the recent years, unfortunately, the situation has worsened in terms of overrepresentation in the justice system. So you'll see, although comprising about 5% of Canada's population, Indigenous people accounted for 27% of federal prison populations in 2016-2017, according to a StatsCan report released on Tuesday. This is coming from a June 19th report. That's a 1-point increase over the previous year and an 8-point increase from 10 years ago. In relation to Aboriginal women, while Indigenous women make up less than 5% of the population, they account for 38% of women in prison, according to a report published last year by Canada's correctional investigator. Currently, Indigenous women make up 50% of the federal segregation placements, and the statistics are getting worse for Aboriginal children in care as well. Just a few years ago, 55% of children in care were Aboriginal. In BC, 64% of our 6,804 kids in care identify as Indigenous, even though they only make up just under 10% of the population under 19 in British Columbia. In terms of the current key activities and the initiatives that the Justice Council is undertaking, the first and foremost is the MOU with the province. In September 2017, an MOU was signed between the BC Aboriginal Justice Council, the Ministry of the Attorney General, and Ministry of Public Safety and Solicitor General to develop an Indigenous justice strategy. The MOU recognizes that significant improvements are required with respect to the way that the justice system interacts with Indigenous people in BC. So the Justice Council, the Ministry, or the Attorney General, and the Ministry of Solicitor General are currently in the process of developing a framework for the Indigenous Justice Strategy, which will include a robust engagement plan with First Nations across BC. The Indigenous Justice Strategy is guided by the Leadership Circle. The Indigenous Justice Strategy is also focused on creating foundational changes to the entirety of the justice system in BC and identifying key initiatives where we can create immediate change on the ground. The key initiatives include provincial Indigenous justice centers, systemic implementation of GLADU principles, and a research initiative that explores pathways for change in the justice system. The research agenda for this paper will be informed and led by the Justice Council. The Leadership Circle is also in the process of jointly hiring an executive director who will help drive and coordinate the development of the Indigenous Justice Strategy. This executive director will be hosted by the Ministry of AG, but will also report directly to all members of the Leadership Circle Steering Committee. Indigenous Justice Centers. The Justice Council has recently put forward a submission to Provincial Treasury Board for funding to develop Indigenous Justice Centers in BC. The Council has proposed to plan and facilitate regional engagement sessions with Indigenous communities and experts to share information and gather input on the scope and composition of the Indigenous Justice Centers. These engagement sessions will also offer an opportunity for the Justice Council to gather information to help inform the development of the Indigenous Justice Strategy and to identify key concerns around the issues of health and justice and women in justice. The GLADU initiative. So as part of the Indigenous Justice Strategy, the Justice Council is working to boost capacity for increased GLADU reports and to lay the foundation for transformative change in the justice system that is inspired by the principles set out by the Supreme Court of Canada decision in GLADU. The Justice Council in BC hosted a knowledge sharing session on GLADU on October 3rd and 4th in Vancouver, which brought together experts and practitioners from BC across Canada to share experiences and best practices. The outcomes of the session will help to guide understanding and strategy in the systemic implementation of the GLADU in British Columbia. Next is the Indigenous Justice Summit. So the Joint Council has been working jointly with the Attorney General and the Solicitor General to develop the 10th Justice Summit in June 2018, which focused specifically on Indigenous justice. The Justice Summits are mandated by legislation and involve a two-day conference attended by lawyers, judges, deputy ministers, and other individuals connected to the justice system to discuss opportunities for change. Each Justice Summit has a different theme, and this year was the first to focus on Indigenous justice and to be jointly developed by an Indigenous organization. In preparation for the Justice Summit, an Indigenous-only caucus was held at the Musqueam Cultural Center on May 31st of this year. A report detailing the discussions and outlining the key themes from the 10th Justice Summit has been developed and will inform the agenda for the 11th Justice Summit, which is scheduled to take place November 2nd and 3rd. There'll be a report developed by the AG and the Solicitor General and BC Aboriginal Justice Council coming out of this Justice Summit that will contain concrete recommendations from the summit participants for foundational change to the justice system in BC and how it interacts with Indigenous individuals and families. Next, the next key initiative is relating to Indigenous courts. So currently Doug White is the co-chair of the Provincial Advisory Committee for Specialized Courts, along with the Acting Chief Justice and the Assistant Deputy Minister from the Ministry of Justice. The Advisory Committee provides advice on the planning, development, and evaluation of Indigenous courts. The Advisory Committee also is supported by Indigenous Courts Subcommittee, which is a technical group that the BC Aboriginal Justice Council also chairs. So in closing, that is a very, very brief update and overview of the key initiatives that the Justice Council is currently undertaking. If you have any questions or concerns, comments, I'm here over the lunch break, and I will turn it back to the chair, Lim Lim.
Lim Lim to you. And Lim Lim to you. Thank you, Kukshiam, HKCM, so much, Rosalie, for a great, thorough, and shortened, I could tell, understanding that we're knowing people are having to leave and getting ready to leave. And so we have a token of appreciation on behalf of the BCAFN for you. So please join me in thanking Rosalie. So with that, we're going to turn now to Indigenous Tourism BC. We have coming forward the co-chair, Frank Antoine, joined by Henry Tso, who is the CFO for Indigenous Tourism BC. And they'll be coming to my right, I think, to microphone 1 and 2 will probably be easiest for you both. And are we going to start with you, Frank? Okay, so microphone number 1, please.
Wayak Frank Quest from Bonaparte community. I'd like to thank you. You already passed a resolution, so I'd like to, before I get going, I'd like to thank Musqueam for allowing us being here in their territory today. But I'd also like to thank Chief Terry Joseph and Chief Judy Wilson for passing the resolution for us. And it's an honor. It's an honor to be up here to be a part of this and to be the co-chair of the Indigenous Tourism of BC. So sweet and quick, I like showing visuals because visuals really give us the identity of what our culture is and how Indigenous Tourism of BC is portraying that culture within our province. So for me, I'd like to play the video right now if we can, and I'll have some comments, and then we'll pass it over to Henry. I know you're all hungry.
Hey, Tanner. Hey, Tanner. You made a fire finally. So you made a fire finally? Let's get some spark happening here. My dad, he brought him to the medicine man. About an hour or two later, he said he was pinching in my lower back. What is that? Medicine. Don't worry about it. Showed him this cat. Doing it all up and down your back, right where your spine's at.
Every time I do this back and forth, I'm giving you a CAT scan.
Wayak, the little Shuswap community has lived in this valley for generations. People from all over the world travel here to experience its rich culture and natural beauty. It's here where I met Dana, a young man in search of a cultural path.
My connection to Tanner was simple. He was intrigued with what I was doing. It was just an easy connection to show him how much fun it was to show the culture in a different format and understanding it together. There's one thing that we all have in common. Your heartbeat. Shama astute, adopted European culture. That's how I grew up, and now I'm adopting Sequep people, my people. Right? So when my daughter, Frank's son and daughter, they won't have to adopt anything. They grew up that way. I went to a stage of feeling lost almost. What do I do? Just angry at the world. The culture filled the void that I was searching for. And I feel like a lot of us are searching for something to fill a void, and then culture did that. The land did that. These old skills did that.
Bless you in this journey, that you're taking on, and take it seriously.
The community sees the importance of investing in young leaders like Tanner. It's their future at stake.
First, I shied away. I just wanted to be like everybody else. What it was like and who we were. There were some strong people. I just wish I could be a shadow of what they used to be. This is culture. This is culture.
That fish is culture.
That
And
fish
trees,
is culture.
there's stories to everything, and there's all culture behind it. And you'll see a lot of First Nations saying, "What's the hair mean? That's my pride. That's the flag we're putting on. This is who we are." When you see a pictograph, that's the footstep. And we can walk around within the territory and you're like, "Oh, it's so great. They were here at one point in this area." But not until you find that arrowhead or get in contact with these pictographs, you actually know. They were right here. Their hands were on this. All those things that were left behind, that's as close as I can get. And it feels great to be able to just put your hand on. All of it plays a huge role of healing ourselves and every Indigenous person.
This is what I am. This is what you are. This is your home. It's your home.
I look at it as an opportunity to grow our culture back. It's replanting the seeds, how we make canoes, how we berry pick, how we lived on this land. That has more opportunity for youth, for adults, elders. He gets it. He gets what took me most of my life to understand. He's going to be a great leader here one day. I'm just another good friend of his and in his life journey that I can share. You know, I can't wait till he gets gray hair because then I know that he's done something for himself.
This is so satisfying. It's not work. It's not work. It's having a fire. You know, talking to people, sharing your culture, learning every day. I wouldn't be here without my mentors. I wouldn't even know how to light a fire.
So when I look at this video that we do, it reconfirms that how we're connecting the culture still with our youth and our elders. And kind of a comment that Chief Judy made is the environment. This is something we need to support. The tourism industry is definitely one of the top industries in BC that is economic driven. But we also have the control of that. We don't have to create partnerships other than with ourselves. So for me, when I see tourism, it's a great opportunity for us to heal, just like that, and also an opportunity for our youth to learn. So it's definitely a great combination for us to be a part of that, and to have Indigenous Tourism of BC leading that. And thanks to the leadership in this room to allow us to speak on behalf of you with all the other different partners that we share together in the tourism industry of BC. So it's something that I really look forward to continue doing, and thank you very much for listening to me and watching the video. I'm going to pass it over to Henry here, but before I do that, Brenda Baptiste, who is our chair, she couldn't make it today. Her car broke down, so you know those rules. You can't get here if you can't walk here. So anyways, I'll just throw that as a joke to Brenda, but pass it on to Henry. Cook's Gem, thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Frank. Here's a picture of Frank actually over in Beijing, China, promoting awareness of Indigenous tourism, and that's one of the important things of our work at Indigenous Tourism BC is provide that awareness and also build and help communities here in BC. Just to provide some statistics and update in terms of the tourism sector. This is our story. We were formed in 1997. We are a nonprofit that supports Indigenous tourism, businesses and entrepreneurs. So it's 21 years for us. Last year we celebrate our 20th anniversary. This is a map of all the businesses that we currently represent. We do represent 95 market-ready businesses. We are continually marketing them internationally. At the same time, we know there's approximately, in our audit, there's 400 Indigenous tourism businesses here that we can market to the world. So we are only able to market 95, but there's still another 300 plus businesses that we can help build up to the level where we can be able to market them at international level. So there's huge potential here in tourism. So this is our mission and vision statement. Basically, we want to make sure there's authentic products that exceeds visitors' expectations. And our mission is to really provide training, product development, business development, and marketing to provide cultural preservation and economic development. You look here, currently BC is the biggest sector is oil and gas, but tourism is a $7.9 billion sector, and it's up and coming, and this is where Indigenous tourism will play a major part in building BC's economy. Back in 1950, the world traveler was only 25 million. As of 2030, it's predicted to be 2 billion people traveling around the world. So there's huge potential, not only in BC, but in Canada. So here's some statistics. Currently, BC is a $7.9 billion in GDP, employs 133,000 people, and it generates $17 billion in revenue. So we conducted an audit that's going to be published this week in terms of what is Indigenous tourism, how does that impact here in BC, and this is the audit report. So here's the statistics. So in terms of Indigenous tourism here in BC, we are a $381 million direct value add. It creates $20 million in tax revenue, $705 million in GDP, but most importantly, we surveyed and audited. There's 401 tourism business here in BC, which employs 7,400 people, and it goes directly to $244 million in terms of salaries and wages that incurs in the Indigenous tourism sector. So some of our targets we want to meet in our 5-year plan. We really want to be up to $75 million in revenue, $1.5 billion in visitor spend, and continue to employ Indigenous people. We're predicting by 2022, almost 5,000 Indigenous jobs will be created. So there's huge demand in Indigenous tourism. A few years ago, in terms of interest, there was 1 in 4 travelers that come to BC that would want to be part of an Indigenous cultural experience. Since 2017, that interest has grown. So now you can see it's 1 in 3 travelers. So the team has been doing great in terms of promoting BC as the go-to in terms of cultural experience, and the data has shown that 1 in 3 travelers now are interested when they come to BC. Our 5-year plan is built on 4 pillars. Just nice and quickly, cultivate relationships. We want to continue to work with First Nation communities and our partners to enhance Indigenous tourism. We want to inspire visitors. That's where our marketing team comes in terms of promoting through the travel trade, travel media, gathering stories, curating stories, and working with the communities to inspire visitors to come and build that awareness. We want to activate experience development. That's really working with the First Nation communities here to build up businesses. That's where all the business development and also economic development workshops that will work with new relationship trusts. We'll work with BCAFN to drive Indigenous tourism as one of the economic drivers here in BC. And finally, advocate. So we will work with the First Nation Leadership Council, hear all the concerns from all the First Nation communities and entrepreneurs, and we would go to provincial government, to federal government to advocate on behalf of all First Nation communities. These are some of the people that we represent. So tier 1 is conceptual, like if a community is interested in building a tourism product or a business, we're here to help. We also assist with tier 2, which is visitor ready, is a business that's operating but may not fit all the criteria where we can promote them internationally. And then we also assist with market ready, which is basically businesses that are ready to be promoted at national level. And tier 4 is the ability for us to go international and work with our international partners. This is kind of like the tourism ecosystem that we work within. It is very complex, but it's just a visualization for the Chief Assembly here to recognize the work that we do. So basically, we do work with a lot of funders that are national and provincial. We also work with our First Nation organizations from the Tech Council, AFOA, and New Relationship Trust. Of course, we report back directly and provide updates to the First Nation Leadership Council. And we also work with the tourism industry from HR related, go to HRs, one of the partners. We are working with all the regional tourism organizations. And basically, the First Nation organization that we work with, we want to collaborate. And basically, this is in our 5-year plan, pulling together all the partners. We have been doing a lot of tourism engagement sessions, which talk about the value of tourism. So if there's your community are interested in looking in terms of tourism development, please let us know. We would love to coordinate sessions and workshops, discuss with the community the value of tourism and importance of it and how it can benefit and impact your community. So that's something that we're working on this fiscal year and planning for next fiscal year too. And these are some of the tourism benefits that, in the videos and Frank talked about. And basically, we came here to get your support for our resolution. I know it's been passed, so I acknowledge and thank you and appreciate that. But just to summarize, we do appreciate, gaining the support from BCAFN and the rest of the First Nation Leadership Council in terms of, giving us this mandate to continue on our work. And at the same time, very appreciative with Regional TG and his team in terms of collaborating and building this MOU where we can knowledge share and look at economic benefits for First Nation communities here in BC. And that's my end of my presentation. I guess we can go into question Q&A.
With permission, we're going to dispense with a question as we are getting to the wrap up and we have lunch waiting, but we do have a token of appreciation. If you could remain during lunch hour, if we have specific chiefs or proxies or other representatives from communities who wish to speak with you directly, that would be greatly appreciated. So we invite you to directly ask any of your questions to them, but please accept these tokens of appreciation on behalf of the BC Assembly of First Nations. And with that, we are into the home stretch. It's my pleasure to bring and to invite Regional Chief TG to provide some closing remarks to this 15th Annual General Meeting.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Masi. Daneza, Tsekuza, Skyza, Chiefs, Hereditary Chiefs, guests, designates of the BCAFN. I want to thank you all today for attending the 15th annual AGM for the BCAFN. And if you stay around a little longer, I'll buy you lunch. So I just want to acknowledge the territory, the Musqueam people, and thank them. Masicho, big thank you to Elder Grant for being here and opening us this meeting in a good way with the welcoming and the prayer. I want to thank the cooks for being gracious hosts and the Musqueam people for being such gracious hosts in terms of making sure that this meeting goes smoothly and well. I want to thank the technical people to my right. Thank you for doing a good job once again and seeing you work with these other organizations. And I just want to thank everybody that came forward and presented over the last 3 days. And really what we've seen over the last 2.5 days was the changing times, not only environmentally, but politically. And as times change, we have to change too. And it's really important that we keep ahead of the curve and be proactive and continue to push the agenda of our Indigenous peoples. The status quo isn't acceptable, and we know that. And it's a work that's done at this table and at our two other sister organizations, the Union of BC Indian Chiefs and the First Nations Summit, where we push the agenda with the two levels of government. And I was just thinking about this today and the changing landscape politically. And we gave updates not only here, but in specific meetings and at the First Nations Summit and the union meetings about legislation. We have a short window of time, and we're really trying to get our rightful place in terms of recognition of our rights, in terms of child welfare. We've heard about it, about the horror stories, and some of you who went through foster care, who went through the child care system. And personally, my nephew, who we almost lost to the child welfare system. We were fortunate enough to save him from the Ontario welfare system and brought him to BC, where he was taken care of by his grandmother. His name is Nathan T.J., and he was the one that eventually went on to become a medical doctor, and now he's becoming a medical doctor with a specialty in dermatology. And it's that story and that potential that we're losing in the thousands of children that are in childcare. And that's what we're trying to avoid. I want to thank the First Nations Energy and Mining Council for assisting myself and the Leadership Council in the development of an EA legislation and really pushing the agenda there with the provincial government. And my colleagues that continue to fight for rights recognition at the Leadership Council and all the technical people that assist us, Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafon, and our lawyers on behalf of the BCAFN, Merle Alexander. I want to recognize them. Cookby Ignis for continuing to advocate on our behalf on a federal legislation for languages. And what we're hearing too is that there is a real positive signal from the provincial government to develop a Languages Act provincially. So that's a really good news. The files that I carry, Economic Development, Justice, and Fisheries from the Assembly of First Nations, the good work that we're doing there in terms of really pushing the agenda once again. And I want to thank my staff for assisting me with those files and at the national level as well with National Chief Perry Bellegarde as well as Ghislaine Picard on Justice and Regional Chief Roger Augustine on Fisheries. Today we've seen presentations on behalf of the Tsilhqot'in, and I thought about that date, June 26, 2014. I think we were all Tsilhqot'in that day. That very important win of recognition of title. And I think of September 13th, 2007, at the UN, United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous People. The passing at the UN to recognize the Indigenous people and our rights. And also the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, June 2015, the passing of that report and the 94 recommendations. And it's our responsibility to carry those recommendations and many of those issues that we are embattled with for far too long and far too many decades where we're fighting for our Indigenous people. I want to thank the Leadership Council, CBC, Chief Bob Chamberlain, Robert Phillips, Grand Chief Stuart Phillip, Cookby Judy Wilson, Executive Cheryl Casimir, and Executive Grand Chief Edward John for their continued work with myself and mentorship. Nothing could prepare me of what we were going into this past year. and I was elected a year ago, 12 days. But during that time, it was a lot of change and a lot of different commitments we were seeing from the federal and provincial governments to really implement UNDRIP, the 94 recommendations, and this provincial government to live up to the Chilcotin decision. So we continue that work, and I want to thank you all for being there and being supportive of myself and on behalf of the BCAFN. This past year, we've seen a change in terms of the board. Susan Miller, I want to thank her, Rebecca David, Charles Morvan, Harvey McLeod, Marilyn Slett, for being accommodating and being understanding that although I was just elected here a year ago, you were patient with me, and I want to thank you for that. And the continued work that we're going to do over the next year and the next 2 years with my board, Charles Morvan, Harvey McLeod, Marilyn Slett, Chief Willie Blackwater, and yet to determine seat that we need to fill. So just a word on that. We do have a list of names, and what will happen, the board will make a decision on those names that were brought forward who are interested in that last board seat, and that would be for a 1-year term, and then an election will happen a year from now. I look forward to working with our new women's rep, Louisa Hosty-Jones. Thank you for putting your name forward and the continued advocacy on behalf of our women. I want to thank Rosalie Wilson for accepting the role in the Justice Council on behalf of the BCAFN. Chief Ryan Day for accepting the role for the First Nations Technology Council, and all those that continue to sit on different councils on behalf of the BCAFN. I want to thank my staff. It's been a year of change. My Chief of Staff, Vanessa West, my babysitter, no, I'm just kidding, my EA, Victoria Austin, all my staff. And we had a meeting earlier on this week, and I looked at my staff and the many territories they represent, from Anishinaabe, Gitxsan, Wet'suwet'en, Cree, Métis, Lheidli-T'enneh, Stolo territory. It's just, I'm just filled with confidence. And Jamie Sanchez, although he's from a different country, he is Mapuche, and he is Indigenous. So I just want to thank my staff for being, once again, patient as well in this time of change. And I think over the last year, really setting the foundation and getting my sense of where I'm at in terms of this office, I look forward, and I'm filled with confidence to fulfill my mandate to represent you, the chiefs of the British Columbia. Just a few other announcements. Earlier on today, we saw the presentation on behalf of the many communities that were struggling and dealing with the wildfire issues. We did add a contribution of about $10,000 to the Tahltan people when they were going through those issues, and I just want to, you know, it's just a drop in the bucket of what you need, but I just want to say we wanted to help you. Today we provided $2,500 to Notley to rebuild Ormond Lake. I want to just recognize of how important Ormond Lake is to our people up north, and it's a healing place. And a couple of their structures were burnt down in the wildfires. So it's a drop in a bucket of what they need, but I just wanted to contribute to them and their initiative to rebuild a sacred place and a sacred place for healing. We did provide a small token to the Ahusit for their continued search for their people of $1,000, so they continue their search for their loved ones. I believe there's 5 or 6 that are missing in the oceans, and it's just a small token of our appreciation, but also to assist you. Another issue that has been brought to my attention that was sent to myself, and I know the Union of BC Indian Chiefs also received this letter from Elaine Alec, Chief Ryan Day's wife, and it was about the use of alcohol at certain functions that we utilize for fundraising. We will accept the letter and we will support the letter. So to you, the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, I know you sent it addressed to Leadership Council, and we will respond to Elaine and state that the BCAFN will no longer have fundraising activities and will provide safe spaces for future functions. We will also send a letter to the National Chief in our desire to have those places, safe spaces for national events as well, and in particular the gala this Christmas. So we support that, and we all know the issues with substance, including alcohol, and how it has affected our Indigenous people. So we don't want to be a part of those issues, and we certainly support Elaine's truth-telling, Elaine's position about what occurred to her. But I think it's important that as leaders we show the way and show by example. So we have a letter that we're drafting to Elaine and also to the Union of BC Indian Chiefs as well. I just want to conclude. A year ago, I also, this past weekend, I should say, I went back home to bury the remains of my nephew who passed away a year ago. I also lost my niece. We will have a function, a potlatch, to deal with that business in Uda Dene Bayo at the House of the Ancestors in Claytley Territory in Prince George on November 10th. And you're more than welcome to attend for those of you that can make it. And it's on our ways as Takla people to start closing off some of these very traumatic things that happened to us, the deaths, the tragic deaths. You know, my nephew was only 22 and died in a hunting accident, and my niece, 37, died of the terrible disease that is cancer. So we will do our business on November 10th and do it in a good way for my niece and nephew. And my prayers to my sisters, Marilyn, my eldest sister, Marilyn, and my youngest sister, Mary, and it was their children that we lost a year ago. And I just want to acknowledge my elders, my BCAFN elder advisors, Gwen Point and Bobby Joe, for, you know, during those times to talk about those issues, about grief and loss. And I think it's really important that we take care of those issues and be healthy in terms of our health, not only physically, but in spirit and in mind. So that's really helpful for the elder advisors, that they provide as much support to myself, and I thank them a lot. And to my youth advisors that represent BCAFN, thank you for continually to represent British Columbia, Johnny Hanius and Angela Charlie. So thank you. You are the future leaders, so masi. And I look forward to the next year. We're living in a time of change. There's a short window of opportunity here. And as we said at the other meetings with the First Nations Summit and the UBCIC, there's a short window of time here for legislation and recognition of our rights title, and really place our rightful place as Indigenous people to create a change for the future. And I thank you all for being here over the last 2.5 days. And lastly, I want to thank my chair for keeping us on time every day and getting us out of this meeting. And thank you, Russell, once again, you know, at the national level and here too for being a great chair. So I just want to thank you. And it's going to rain tomorrow, so we got her an umbrella. So, and a gift, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. And before, do we have somebody to say a prayer? Do we have any volunteers for Bryce Williams? Mussy, thank you. Before we have lunch. Okay.
So just before you sing, we're going to have your drum and your voice be the conclusion of this 15th annual general meeting. Thank you so much, everybody. It has been a pleasure to serve you. And thank you so much, Chief, for stepping forward with your talent and your wisdom and your ancestors. And I wish you all well on your safe travels. And this concludes the 15th annual general meeting.
Quick words before I sing a song. The song I'm going to sing is a journey song. We'll be using Bless the Food as well as wish everybody safe travels home to their communities. Thanks, guys.